Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Well, 6:30 plus, I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals for the City of Plattsburgh to hear one applicant. I believe the applicant is actually the City of Plattsburgh. However, we're going to be hearing from Prime, I believe, and their consultants. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. It looks like Matt just joined.
Okay,
Yes.
Charlie, can you hear me?
Yep, I can, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Yes, that's correct. Gail will
Okay,
go first, and then we'll speak, and then
okay.
answer every question you have.
Okay, so I just like to, first of all, we are here as the board, and I think we've been there, but I'd like, just for the record, to state a couple of things. One, Ellie is here, but will not be voting, but she is a member of the board, so will not be asking questions or so on tonight, but also needs to be here because she's been following this every time. And should there be an issue in the future, we need 5 board members and she can participate. Right now, she and Megan are alternates, and Megan is going to be, has been, and will be, continue to do that for this particular application. That's number one. Could the people for the applicant, just, I know some of you, but just for the record, state your name and position with the applicant. We'll start with Charlie.
Sure. Charles Gottlieb from Whiteman, Osterman, and Hannah here on behalf of Prime Plattsburgh LLC.
This is Turner Bradford from McFarland Johnson. We're the design engineers on behalf of Prime Companies.
Deb Osterhout of Prime Companies.
Dean DeVito, Principal, Prime Companies.
Yes, my name is Dan Shear. I'm with Saratoga Associates. We are not directly affiliated with the Prime project, but we work on behalf of the city of Plattsburgh for the Park project and the Riverwalk project.
I'm Steve McKenzie. I'm with McKenzie Architects.
Emily Gardner, also with Saratoga Associates.
Matt Miller, Director of Community Development for the city.
Gail Henderson King, White and Burke, consultant to the city for this project.
Dean Schneller, a city attorney.
Okay, and Corey, just, could you identify yourself also?
Yeah, good evening. My name is Corey Auerbach. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Barclay Damon, and I've been recently retained by the zoning board to provide counsel to them regarding this project.
Great. Thank you. The purpose of this meeting, I'd like to talk for a little bit first before I get to the applicants, if you don't mind. The purpose of this meeting, I think, is, at least it's my impression, that we've had several informational meetings, and you've been to, as Charlie said, 6 or 7 public hearings, a couple with us, some with other people. But I don't think we've really ever, we've made suggestions and some comments, but I don't think we've ever actually said, hey, applicant, what about this? Or can you tell us about that so much? And I think that on our way to rendering a decision, that's an important part of the process that needs to be done. We've had a bunch of public comment periods. We've had a lot of written comments. There's some of that I'd like to address at some point here. I'm not sure if I'm quite ready yet. And I'm assuming that there is This is open to other participants, or I'm not even sure what they're called, people that aren't on the screen that are watching from the public. Is that correct? Participating, Ethan or Matt?
Yes, that's correct. As of now, it's not a public hearing until the board decides, but there are in the things that went out to the press and on the city's website, information to log on to the Zoom meeting as an attendee so there are people as in attendees right now.
Great. Okay, so that said, I do want to talk just slightly about this concept of applicants, zoning boards, and the public. And I, perhaps you know, I monitor this process pretty carefully, formally as part of this process and informally online wherever I can. And I value public input, and I value and at least want to understand public perception of this process. There have been a lot of questions. I want to address something. There have been a lot of questions online about how come the applicant gets to talk a lot more. And they don't seem to be limited for time, and the applicant gets to say what they want or whatever. And the public is restricted, and it's part of our process. I just want to address this so that the people watching and the people here understand that we've done this process, although not as a Zoom process, for many, many years. And the way it's always worked is that the applicants and the zoning board own the process, have ownership stake, because they have standing. The applicant has standing. They have a financial or an ownership interest or some type of interest in the project, and that gives them standing. Because they have standing, they participate in the application process with the zoning board, who eventually, when they get all the information they need, make decisions about the application and granting or not granting of anything from variances to use variances, area variances, and special use permits. The public is allowed to participate in that process as part of the public hearing, to observe it, understand what we're doing, and have access to the information that we have. But they are not afforded, there's no, like, we get equal time. This isn't political comment where one candidate gets to speak on Channel 5 so the other one does. This is a process, part of which involves the public. At no point does that mean we want to shortchange the public in any way, or not pay attention to their comments and suggestions and questions. But I want to be clear that I've seen questions like, how come we don't get to have a lawyer in the meeting? Because you're not the applicant. The public is not the applicant. And I just want to understand that difference. Does not mean the opinions are not important, does not mean the questions are not important. But this is a process that we are participating in, that the public is allowed and has the right to understand, watch, and comment on within that framework. So we've done our best, and it's pretty tough when you get lots and lots of letters, and we could read them, and we could spend hours and hours reading comments, and some of those letters, and I've read them all, literally. I haven't just gone, oh, another one complaining or another one liking it. I have read every single piece of correspondence, and I assume that the other board members have, and that the applicant has. And that is what those are for. They are to convince us about why your opinion matters to our decision and why it matters to what the applicant does. It is part of that process, and we value it. And to think that we're diminishing that value because we don't have time to read them all in public takes for granted something that we take very seriously, and that is our gathering of information to understand this process. So it's unfortunate that there are so many of them, and no, it's not just a case of, oh, here's another one against it, we're not going to bother reading that. That is not the issue. The issue is many of them say the same things, and it's good to know that many people feel the same way. But a more efficient use of our time and of the process is to get answers to those questions. The applicant has them. The board members all have them. It's in part of the record. Every single one, including, frankly, the ones I got today that were provided after the deadline. And I get the fact that deadlines are a problem. So even the ones today, as far as I'm concerned, were sent to me and are now up to, I think, 10 or 11 o'clock this morning, are now considered part of the record for this application. Every single one. And it's in there and it's in the file and it's been taken into account by everyone. So I don't want the public to feel that we aren't listening, but I want them to understand that they have a part in the process and they can help us with that process. But that does not mean that they have the same access to the process that the board and the applicant have. And I'm sorry if that's disturbing or you don't agree with that, or you think that's not fair. It's the way it's been for a long, long time. And I want the public to understand that, so maybe you won't be upset as you're watching and you'll see they didn't read my thing again. We're here to talk this time. We've heard from the public. We've gotten lots and lots of correspondence about why this project doesn't work and questions that, frankly, matter to me and that I'll be asking and that the applicant is seeing and is, I'm assuming, ready to answer. We have not diminished that role of the public, and we are not bypassing it, but we need, at this point now, what we're ready for is to ask the applicant all the questions. Why is this big? Why is this here? What do you do about this? Is this a problem? How does this fit? Why is this? And even within that, our jurisdiction is for the 2 special use permits. We are here to decide whether to grant special use permits to amend the boundary of the planned unit development and whether or not to allow residential uses with a special permit, which are allowed in the district, on the first floor. So within that jurisdiction, we have certain things that we are going to talk about and ask questions about, and we can talk about the criteria that everybody's so familiar with now. But as they relate to the 2 special use permits, the jurisdiction for a lot of this, as Gail will certainly tell you as an example, lies with the planning board. And although there are variations from our code that we may or may not agree with as a zoning board, they are not in our jurisdiction. They are not what this application for special use permits with the zoning board is about tonight. Tonight is a question and answer period. I sincerely doubt that we'll be able to form our own resolutions regarding either the findings or, frankly, the special use permits tonight, because I think that we're going to have to take this information and these answers tonight. This is my feeling now coming out, my impression. We're going to be able to take all the information we get, which is mostly, I believe, going to be reinforcement of what's been presented, and use that to form whatever resolutions we would want to eventually vote on. But tonight, and we'll see how far we get. Tonight, I think the issue is for the applicant to really make their presentation and say, this is what we're doing, and us to ask questions about what we don't understand. Does that make sense to the applicant? Charlie, I guess
Yeah.
I'll ask you.
Yes, it does.
It does, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody on the board have any other comments about that before I actually start having Prime present? No, okay. So what we're going to start with, and this should be just like any other meeting where the public came and sat in the audience while we had a presentation before anything else, and we're going to have Prime. I'd like somebody to just run through the project, and we know about it, and just say what it is, how many square feet, the whole thing, a summary of the project, the size of it. We have a whole list of the variations, but we can talk about that after. But who wants to do that from the applicant?
Mr. Chairman, I think the city would like to start, and for that, I will turn it over to Gail, who will run through a summary of the application from the city's perspective.
Great, that'd be great, thanks.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and zoning board members. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to share the screen here. Hold on. Make sure. Okay. So for tonight, I'm going to just go briefly over the entire applications, and the specific details that Ron was just requesting will probably be in the presentation from Prime by Charlie, but I will go through this as quickly as I can. I know you've received a ton of information on this project, and I don't want to reiterate and go over all of the materials. I'm sure you've read it all and have questions, but the last packet of information that we submitted, submitted a revised special use permit project narrative and secret narrative, updated EAF form, city overall, downtown overall parking plan report and information, Prime's information on parking, and public comment responses. For the actual PUD boundary SUP application, just want to quickly go over what is existing and what's proposed. On the left is the existing PUD, which does not include the highway oil site, but it includes all of the Durkee Street lot, the Gateway development, and the Broad Street parking lot on the other side of on the south side of Broad Street. The proposed PUD boundary will not include the Broad Street parking lot, but does include the former highway oil site, which actually now is part of the Durkee Street lot. And then that PUD will be subdivided into 2 lots, which is part of the PUD subdivision application before the planning board. So just wanted to clarify that and make sure people understood what's actually being proposed here. We just quickly kind of put a larger vision on terms of conformance with this existing city plans. So the Plattsburgh Comprehensive Plan for the Central Business District recommends a mix of uses, including commercial, office, retail, and residential. It supports intensified development in this Central Business District, and also supports access to the Saranac River for recreation and the public. The City of Plattsburgh local waterfront revitalization plan also has economic development and downtown revitalization that is key to that study. And this area, specifically the Durkee Street lot, is considered a gateway linking the downtown to the waterfront at Dark Street, as well as the Saranac River. And this is also noted in the DRI strategic plan. For the building structure, the design, and again, I'll let the architects and the Prime talk about this more, but again, just the building has been laid out to be reflective of the urban setting that it's in. Its height is similar to existing buildings within the downtown urban setting. It's similar architectural styles and details that have been taken from existing buildings within the area. It has a variety of color and character and materials to kind of break up the massing of the building. It's sensitive to the downtown core. And most importantly, it's reestablishing that street edge that probably existed years ago when there were buildings on the site. The city parking plan, this was the existing parking that's on the Durkee Street lot will be relocated to nearby lots and streets within the special assessment district. All of this was looked at and addressed in both the draft and final GEIS. The plan shows where the proposed parking spaces will be throughout the downtown, but they will be relocated. The project parking for the site, this shows the plan of the surface lot on the left side and the parking lot underneath the building on the right side of the image. There's the basement level parking plan there. So that there's sufficient parking for the development as designed. There are proposed 50 publicly available parking spaces. It's appropriate for the site. Prime has based this on similar development that they have done, which they can talk about more of that. And a majority of the parking spaces will be underground for the project. For the surrounding open space, again, kind of taking the big picture here, for the Durkee Street development for this project, there's going to be a connection through the Durkee Street lot connecting the Arts Park, which is being developed, redeveloped, enhanced as part of Saratoga Associates' work with the city, as well as the Durkee Street improvements and Bridge Street improvements, streetscape improvements, will then be able to connect to the Riverfront Walk, which again is a project that Saratoga Associates is working on. But you can see how the green space connects with other surrounding green spaces and really is part of a larger vision for the city. The green space and treatment on the site itself for the Durkee Street development, for the PUD itself, a minimum requirement of 15% is needed for the PUD. The PUD will result in 22% of open space. The Riverwalk will be connecting both north and south, as well as through the site with improved pedestrian, with a proposed pedestrian corridor to the Arts Park and into the city. And then there's landscape plantings and pedestrian amenities throughout. And just some quick images for the Saranac River riverfront improvements. And again, it's not part of this application, but it is, again, to give you an idea of kind of what the city is envisioning for this whole development here. You can see on the left side, the pedestrian walkway coming down from Durkee Street, and then the riverfront improvements along the site with the proposed prime development in the slide. And this is a view from Bridge Street. So this is the entrance from Bridge Street to the Riverwalk, and again with the prime development here and the proposed walkway improvements. And there are some PUD deviations that again are being requested through the PUD subdivision process in front of the planned for the planned unit development in front of the planning board. But most of the proposed deviations have to do with setbacks, again, trying to bring the building up to the street edge and providing that streetscape edge for the project. But the main one is the minimum parking space requirement. And again, Prime will go into that in more detail. So I'll leave it at that with questions and comments, and I can turn it over to Charlie to describe and talk about the Prime project.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Charlie Gottlieb here on behalf of Prime. First, Corey, welcome. Glad to have you on board. Hope you didn't kill too many trees printing out the application materials. What I'll do is quickly kind of set up the conversation and then kick it over to Turner Bradford, project architect, to go over a history of where we started with this and kind of where we are now. One of the things we talked about last week before the planning board was, what did this project look like before we had any of the 6 or 7 public comments? And it was quite large. It was expansive down Durkee Street. And to look at what we have now is an indication that the public process that Mr. Chairman, you were commenting on is working. We've tried and have responded to pretty much every public comment at this point. One of the things I will highlight before I kick it over to Turner is, we are going through the site plan process with the planning board, but we do realize that this board isn't just going to assess this special use permit application in a vacuum. You do need to understand what is going to happen on the site. So we certainly understand that. And once Turner is done, we will bring it back for you and demonstrate to you how it relates to your special use permit criteria. Then we'll answer any questions you might have. So Turner, I'll kick it over to you now if you're out there somewhere in virtual reality.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. I am here. I'm going to try to share my screen. Whoa. Can you guys see that? Can you see my screen?
No.
No. Share content. All right. Let's give it one more try. Hang on. No, any better?
No.
Nope.
What are you trying to pull up, Turner? Maybe I can pull it up.
I'm trying to pull up, it was a presentation we did. I took the first 4 slides of the presentation we did for the county planning board, where we walked through the history of the history of the site layout.
I don't think I have that, but maybe if you turn on your camera, maybe that impacts the shared screen capabilities.
It shouldn't. Turner, if you're having issues, if you could email what you're trying to open up to either Charlie or myself, and we can try it from our end.
Yeah.
While you're doing that, I guess we'll chat just for a second. I think that it is important to see where it started. I know there's been a lot of comparison, frankly, to the original DRI concept of 45 apartments or whatever it was, and so many square feet, a lot of square footage of commercial space and all that stuff, which is different than what eventually, I'm not even sure what your original proposal was to the city back when it went out for proposals, but it has changed. Is that correct? I mean, do you know how many apartments you originally were going to have?
Yeah, so that's actually where I'm gonna start is at Prime's original proposal and response to the RFP that the city put out. In terms of the comments that were made about, numbers of apartments in the 40s.
Can everybody see my screen?
I mean, that
now
was.
We can see this.
Yeah, now we can see it.
Is it a picture with a bunch of
right.
colored cars?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, that's the original proposal.
All right, now I have to somehow be able to get out of my thing so I can see.
November of
Now
2018, this is.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so in November of 2018, is this the plan that was part of the original proposal to the city? When the city solicited proposals and only got one, was this it?
This was it. That is correct. And so it consisted of 2 L-shaped buildings that primarily took up all of the frontage along both streets. The building on the north side was entirely enclosed top to bottom. And the reason I bring that up is the building on the south side where it looks transparent, the bottom shape of that L, the first floor was open so that the parking could extend under that, and there would have been a faux building facade to front Durkee Street in that location. So the first floor of that building is only the northern wing. And then there were surface parking lots, as well as the northern L building did have a underground garage in the basement. And there was the amenities area for tenants in that area as well. So this is what was presented and described in the original RFP. After,
Okay.
you go ahead. Okay.
Slide.
Yeah, after the initial submission and the analysis of the RFPs and the award, at some point, Prime and I came to, and sorry, just to go back 1 second, Charlie mentioned me as the architect. I'm not the architect. I'm the engineer. I'm in charge of the site plan. Steve McKenzie is the architect. So just to clarify, but you can go to the next one, Charlie.
Excuse me for just a moment.
Yeah, please.
Somebody's got music playing and it's really distracting and kind of diminishing the ability to focus here.
Okay, I apologize. That is me. Give me 1 second. Susan? Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. So we presented that plan at a common council meeting of essentially what was supplied in the RFP. There was quite a bit of public comment, largely revolving around access to the riverfront and parking. No surprise. So this, in working through that with the city and Prime, we went back to the drawing board and brought this forward in May, where we have, and I'm just gonna, go back to the original numbers. So the original numbers had about 500 square feet more of commercial space. And this second round has 12 more residential units. So obviously we added the southern wing to the southern building and took the amenity space, pulled that into the courtyard of the southern building, and then actually what we did was we made a portion of the southern building here also have underground parking. You can see the arrow just north of the amenity space going down to the basement garage. And by doing all that, we were able to get 50 more parking spaces into this concept plan. We brought this, I believe it was presented in May. Really probably the biggest public comment at this point, it became a parking discussion. What could be done to create more parking. It was clear at this point that parking was a pretty hot button topic. So Charlie, you can go forward one more. And so in order to create really as much open area and parking as possible, we created one building, kept the U shape, put parking within the courtyard, and really drew down the amenity space to a minimum that was acceptable, which opened up really the entirety of the southern lot portion of that lot to a surface parking lot. The other thing it enabled was the entirety of the building footprint on the north to be underground parking. So really it increased the garage parking by quite a bit, because the entire footprint of not only the building, but the courtyard space in the middle became a garage parking. This really is the bones of where we are now. This is essentially the site plan as you guys have seen it. There have been tweaks to this general concept, but I would say this essentially became the concept that we used to create what we currently have. The major changes that you'll know or you'll notice between this and where we are now is that the future development has become the retention of the farmers market building. The surface lot and the pedestrian walkway have changed a little bit to increase the attractiveness of the walkway and its integration with the green spaces north and south. We actually made it quite a bit wider, particularly down where it narrows on the east end of the lot, as well as making it a serpentine shape to increase its attractiveness. I believe, Charlie, that the last thing I put in is, okay, so this is the site plan that we have now and that we've finessed and tweaked based upon comments, not only from the public and the boards, but also the city's third-party technical review in regards to the site plan overall. So, I mean, really, this is the site plan that you guys have seen a couple times now, with the main U-shaped building, courtyard parking, basement garage, surface lot, the retained farmers market building, and that open area becoming civic space, the serpentine pedestrian walkway from the arts park to the river walk.
And the river walk is not part of this, it's below this. And that is part of the other lot, the lot that the city is retaining for the tenant and along the river, is that correct?
That is correct. That is part of the lot that will extend north from the ICV building, and then we'll include the Riverwalk area that you see there. That is a representation of what Saratoga Associates has proposed at this point. But that, you're correct, that is not part of this project. That is part of the city's, part of the city's other DRI efforts. And we've been working with Saratoga Associates to integrate not only that space with the site, but also across Durkee, the Arts Park, as that integrates into this site on the west side.
When they talk about, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's okay.
No, not at all. Yeah, go for it. Go for it, yeah.
When Gail talked about the 22% green space, is that including the Riverwalk and QV and the ICV lot, or is that just this lot?
That included the entire PUD, so that includes,
that's right.
Correct, both the ICV, the Riverwalk, and this lot.
Right.
Because the PUD needs to meet the green space, the open space requirement in and of itself. And it does, as well as this site individually meets the open space requirement.
Okay. Do you happen to know what it is for this site, the percentage? We can find
I
out.
do. Yeah, no, I'll find it. Give me a
I'd
couple
be
minutes
curious.
and I'll look that up.
That's okay.
Yep. But so the buildings as they are shown now comprise 13,400 square feet of commercial space. The 3,400 of that is the southern existing building that's being retained, and 1,000 of that is the wing of the building fronting Durkee Street, and 115 residential units that will be on the north and south wings of the building on the first floor, and then the subsequent floors above it going up. The basement of that entire building will be parking, which will be 165 spaces underground. Within the courtyard of the building will be 35 parking spaces, and in the open lot, 86 spaces.
Is the footprint of this building, I keep hearing different figures, and I tried to analyze it and figure it out, and I'm fairly good at this stuff. Is the building itself, not including the parking garage underneath, about 200,000 square feet of floor space?
Correct. The footprint of the building is about 200,000 square feet.
Well, not the footprint, the stacked on top of each other, in other words, right? Yes. Right. Is it like 40,000 square feet per floor or something like that? I guess except the first floor is missing that alleyway, but I mean, I guess my question is it 200,000 square feet of building, not including the parking garage underneath of we'll call it habitable space or whatever, building space? Do we know?
Yeah, I would defer. I don't know.
I don't
Steve,
think that's correct, Steve. Can you chime in on that? Steve? I'm relatively certain that number, that's a high number
Right,
for the
not-
140 something, I
Not
think.
counting the parking garage. Not counting the parking garage.
Yeah.
Right. The other question I had, and you might be able to answer this again, Turner, is the parking in the parking garage underneath, all those spaces up above look like regular spaces. Has anybody done anything with compact or subcompact spaces? Some of the spaces look smaller than other spaces. Some are just because the way the angles work out bigger, but are they all standard spaces downstairs, or have they, which the planning board can grant, but have they provided compact and subcompact spaces to get to the 165?
So they are all standard spaces. If they look different, it's an optical illusion.
Okay.
They're all
9 by 18.
They're all 9 by 18. That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
I
And
had
in
mentioned
the
before go ahead.
yeah, in the garage, same answer.
In the garage, yes.
Yes. Yep. So yeah, I recall you bringing that up. I would defer to Prime as to their level of comfort providing compact spaces, how often they do that, how often they get used. I mean, I think at this point, the thought is
Right.
to provide them all at a standard space. And honestly, how many would we squeeze in there? To tell you the truth, I don't know. I don't know that we'd get one, unless we made a whole string of them a whole string of them compact, and I don't think we want to provide that percentage
Not a problem.
at a compact rate. You know,
I
what
was
I mean?
just curious if they had done that, so, okay.
Yep.
And so this is the project
Correct.
right here,
Correct.
right, okay. Who's next?
Yeah, so I mean, at that point, Charlie, if you want to jump in and go through the variance questions.
Yeah. I'm going to stop. Can everyone hear me? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Matt, if you don't mind pulling up on your screen the presentation that I had for the planning board from Monday night, if you still have that accessible. If not, I can pull it up from my emails.
Yeah, let me see if I still have that.
Okay. While Matt's looking, I just want to kind of recap on where we are. So you just saw and here comes Steve, project architect. He'll have the information related to the square footage of the floor area. Steve, do you have the total square footage of the floor area of the building?
I do. Sorry, I had to step away. The dog had to go out. I had to go find my wife, but I was successful.
Well, that's great.
That's a good thing. So square footage you're asking about, gross area?
Yes.
Okay. Bear with me here.
And while you look that up, Steve, Ron, I'll just go back and answer your open space question on the site. So within the site, it's not given as a percentage. It's given as it's actually a square foot calculation. It's the required setbacks of the lot that is the minimum open space. So that'll actually vary with the height of the building. So based upon the 5-story building, it comes out to be 22,105 square feet of open space. And the project right now has just over that, 22,135 square feet of open space.
On that lot, just that lot, right? Yeah.
Correct. That's
That's
just
right.
the prime. That's just the prime lot itself.
Right.
Yep.
It's not a percentage like another lot. It's in the data. It's a frontage thing, right?
I have the area. Did you want total, excuse me, Ron, did you want total square footage or what?
I wanted to know how many square feet of construction the building is, not counting the parking garage.
Okay. Not counting the parking, we have about 155,000 square feet. The covered parking's about 56,500.
The covered parking is how much again?
The exact number is 463 for the parking level. The basement. And it actually includes the area under the courtyard, inside the U-shaped building footprint. That's why it's bigger than a typical floor up above. And if you look at our largest floor for apartments, that's just under 30,000 square feet gross.
So just say it to me once more. The building is how big total?
The building without parking, I'll give you the exact number here. If you bear with me. Five, six, 4, 6, 3. Okay, so the building, not including parking, is 146,092. I did that in my head the first time. So 146,092 for the building, and the parking is 56,463.
So altogether, counting parking, it's about 200,000. That's what I wanted to know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, 202,555.
Thank you.
Yep.
And
Charlie, I'm looking here, but I don't believe I have the presentation from the planning board from Prime from.
that's okay. I
the
have
last
it. I
meeting.
got it.
Okay.
And I also asked Deb to email me another thing I couldn't find. Without paper documents, I am somewhat lost in this new COVID era. But I'm going to share my screen one more time and go through some of the other visuals that we provided for the board, as well as some of the visuals we provided as a response to comments. So let me just share this. Okay, so this is the site plan Turner just went through with you, and the other visuals that I'm going to go through. As I mentioned before, we've submitted a lot of information, most notably our on McFarland Johnson letterhead, a February 21st, 2020 response to comment document where a lot of this came into play. A lot of these renderings, a lot of these additional materials were not submitted because they were, requirements of the planning board or the ZBA or the planning board, but submitted because we saw a need to explain further what the site might look like, what it might look like on the street level. And I think it is quite helpful because anytime I'm noticing as a land use attorney, anytime you're developing a vacant space, right now we have a lot that is just a parking lot. And there's going to be a built structure on it in the future. So it is quite hard to visualize just as you're walking by. And I completely understand that. So if you guys can see my screen now, this cross section that was prepared to demonstrate to the board what is the actual impact going to be of the special use permit related to residential units on the first floor. What does that even mean? So we will have residential units on the first floor, but because it is a sloping property, it's not going to have the true effect of having your window right directly on a sidewalk. So as you can see here, you have this first image here where my cursor is. This is what it will look like from the pedestrian walkway. As you can see, a normal, reasonable person's head is right by where the commercial area is, sloping downwards. So really no residences on this side will be impacted. There's no security concerns. No doors will open from a unit onto a street. Everything's interior. More importantly, if you look at Bridge Street, where the special use permit is applicable, you have that same person walking down Bridge Street and you can see where their head is. So if you're on Durkee Street, the corner of Durkee and Bridge, you'll be able to walk into the building. As you go down, your head will be right here where the residential units are, but you're not going to be able to see into those units. Those people in the units are not going to be able to, look out their window and directly see the sidewalk. So the typical concerns the board might have with this special use permit really are not applicable here, thankfully, to the topography of the property.
Charlie?
And just to jump in real quick there, so that we represented that person at 6 feet tall, just to give you an idea of what you're seeing.
Charlie?
Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question. I'm looking at I believe it's the most recent one, A2.2, which is level 1 plan. And it seems to indicate that there are open balconies on that side on level 1.
Yeah, so let me go to the rendering. Okay, so you can see the open balcony. And Steve, if you're there, please correct me if I'm wrong. The open balcony will be up here, but there would be no open balconies. Or could you explain the open balconies on the first floor along Bridge Street?
Yeah, they occur, I don't know if you have the elevation handy, Charlie, but they do occur once you get past the corner building, as I call it. So where you see that first pair of windows, that's really into the lobby and administrative area for the housing part of it. So it's really not till you get to that third bay that you have a balcony.
So right here.
Right. And
But
then
there are balconies on the street,
you're above the street,
on
Ron.
that first floor.
Yes, there are balconies
people will
on
be
those
out on
units,
a
correct?
balcony.
Right. So the actual exterior wall of the unit is set back 8 feet from the face of the balcony. And then we have a mix of different unit types. Some are 2 bedrooms, some are 1 bedroom on the ground floor. So, you know, the proportions are going to vary a bit.
Right, but what I'm saying is that there will be residential evidence from the street
Yep,
on Bridge Street.
right.
And you can see
It won't just
that,
be windows, it won't just be windows into a unit, there'll be people on balconies.
Yep, that's correct.
and you know, I would point out that, you know, folks enjoying their balcony, you know, in an urban area like that is nothing that would be uncommon in a actual downtown area.
You're right on the second or third floors, and we have that on City Hall Place as an example above Iris's. However, it does not lend itself to a feeling of only being commercial there. I'm just mentioning it. It's one of the things that I noticed. I'm going to probably interrupt you a little bit during the stuff so that we can never more question anymore. I can say, remember I said about the balconies? That's why I brought it up. That's all.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, sure. So no problem. This is one of the renderings. This rendering the board was most recently revised in January based on planning board comments on this Bridge Street exterior, which was Steve provided some additional architecture elements and coloring to break that side up. Moving forward, you can see the rendering from the pedestrian walkway and the former location of the farmer's market and what it will look like as you head down to the Riverwalk. Scrolling down now, this was a rendering that was requested at one of the public hearings. This is looking up Bridge Street into the Riverwalk area. And you can see here as well, this is where one of the entrances to the underground garage will be. Again, another rendering from the actual bridge on Bridge Street, looking at the building and the Riverwalk here as well. This rendering was, we had noticed that Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition had done a similar aerial simulation of the building, but it didn't have any of the architectural elements. And so we had it sent to Steve, and Steve provided this illustration of what an aerial simulation from the northwest would look like in comparison to the other buildings in the surrounding area. As I started off, it is hard to realize a building on a vacant piece of land. We recognize that. And if you want Steve to elaborate a little more, but you know, from my untrained architecture eye, you can see how the different architectural elements and coloring is designed to blend in with the existing neighborhood.
Yeah, you're doing a good job, Charlie.
Well, thanks. I
let me know when you keep going. I'll add just a few comments.
Yeah, sure. This building height comparison was provided in response to, and I can't remember now whether it was a ZBA or planning board public hearing, but the Plattsburgh Citizens Coalition presented this illustration at one of the meetings. And then when requested for a PDF of that same illustration, this is what we got. So you can see the difference between what the PCC was presenting at the meetings versus what they were actually submitting for the actual record. So what we did was we had Steve actually take a scaled version of this, put it behind, Durkee Street. So this is actually the lot. These are the buildings on the other side of Durkee Street. And you can see the differences in height. And the scale, despite what we heard from public comments, the scale is provided here, showing the different elevations. And now I'm just going to pull up on my emails. This is another height comparison that we submitted from Bridge Street. So the notion was that, well, why didn't we submit it for Bridge Street? There was a not to scale drawing recently submitted by the PCC. We had Steve take a look at it. If you notice this shaded area here, this is the not to scale version that the PCC submitted in their most recent comment letter. This is the scaled version of what the development will look like. Again, the development is going to be right here, but if you show that, you know, you're not going to see the architecture because coloring is important when you're talking about height. Again, those are the slides. You saw these images from Gail. One of the issues that came up in a PCC letter, excuse me, as well as at the county planning board meeting. And I will just note the county planning board did approve as local considerations all special use permits. So they did agree with the permit applications. They suggested that, you know, they kind of wanted to see some more imagery as to how the Riverwalk is actually going to interchange with Prime's development. Prime and Saratoga Associates and the city did work together on this, even though this is outside of Prime's site plan. You can see the interchange here from the pedestrian walkway to the river walk and the improvements. The other thing I'd like to highlight is let's remember what the property is now. It is a parking lot that is completely paved with a boardwalk, riverwalk that cannot be safely accessed by any of the residents. In our February submission, based on public comment, we met with the police department, we met with the fire department. The police department said the design of the riverwalk in the building is safe. And so those are all in the record. So these are the illustrations, I think, that really help put things into context. If you guys have any questions related to this, related to building height, Steve is probably your man to answer those. Otherwise, Mr. Chairman, other members of the board, if you'd like to see anything else, we're happy to provide it.
Yeah, if I could just touch for a moment, Charlie. I think as you saw from some of the site plan evolution, Ron and company, the initial proposal was 2 buildings and parking on the entire site. And from a massing standpoint, I don't know if you saw or recall the original RFP images, but it looked more like a 4-story building with a penthouse on top of it that was set back considerably from the edges. And the massing was likewise broken up to be a bit more of a cluster of individual buildings. And that was 127 units. And then as part of responding to some of the comments, both from the city and planning and zoning boards and from the public, I think Prime and really the entire team has tried to be very responsive to those comments and considerations. I've always said part of our job is sort of balancing all the constraints, all the agendas. And I think a design is really balancing influences from the outside in with influences or factors that drive the concept from the inside out. So that really has always been sort of the challenge for our role as an architect, and I think Turner's by extension as well. So what you saw when the building changed from the original concept is, in order to respect some of the economic requirements for the project, 115 units is really kind of the threshold below which the project is not economically feasible. And so that created some pressures in terms of the design to somehow have enough volume, enough square footage to make that work. So the building actually evolved into looking a bit taller. And I think that's what's created some of the comments, certainly on the part of the public, as to why the building is the size it is and the height it is. And again, some of that is economic realities. So in response to some comments we've heard recently at the planning board, both actually in December, I think the last Monday night, we had some other comments we are in fact revisiting some of the concepts that we had originally and seeing if there's a way we can strike a balance in terms of height as well as square footage and number of units. And just having take a quick look at it, I'm pretty sure we could achieve that. But it's important to bear in mind, again, what the challenges are, both as an architect and really for the entire team, to find the sweet spot in terms of all those constraints. So we really do appreciate the input. We appreciate having this kind of dialogue. And we are trying to do our best to listen and hear what you're saying, and seeing that, really trying to do our best to accommodate all the various factors. But at the end of the day, we all realize you can't please everybody. You do the best you can, but we have to respect the fundamentals that are necessary for the project to work. So you will be seeing, I think, a slightly revised version a bit later, but I just wanted to make sure those elements were clear in terms of what drives the process. And likewise, we've done things with the design, as Charlie touched on, in terms of materials, and introduced a bit more color. The other thing I think that's important to bear in mind is we realize this is an historic setting, this part of downtown Plattsburgh. And I'm currently involved in a project in downtown Vergennes, Vermont. We're actually renovating and expanding an historic structure. It's an Italian building that's now being used as a retirement community. And in consultation with both the State Historic Office as well as the preservationist architect that we're working with, they both make a point of saying, do not try to match or duplicate the original building, because that almost never works. It's very difficult to do for all kinds of reasons. And more importantly, their real preference is that you not blur the distinction or maybe detract from whatever the original historic structure looks like. They want that to remain visible and really the focal point for whatever we do with the addition. So they said it's important not only to have that take a background, it's important to be sympathetic to the original, but not really to compete with or try to overwhelm the original building. So,
And Steve, I think I can jump in here too, because one of the really important issues here is, does this fit within the character of the community? And we've highlighted several times, we've consulted with the New York State Office of Historic Preservation, and we got a tremendous letter from them noting that there would be no community character, and I'm paraphrasing here, impacts on the historic districts in Plattsburgh. So if there's any additional questions.
I just want to clarify one thing, Charlie and Steve. So what we're looking at with the elevations right now, it's showing a sloped roof, which is making the front of the building appear to be a little bit higher. So what we are going to take a look at, just to see if we went to more of a flat roof, to be the same number of units, same unit mix, nothing inside would change, but the appearance from the front, because it was flat as opposed to a sloped roof, would bring that front roof level down 4 or 5 feet, something like that. So I just wanted to be clear that we we're not going to redesign the inside of the building, but just trying to see if we can come up with another option for the elevation that makes it appear lower.
And that's an issue we're dealing with at the planning board level. It's part of their site plan review. It doesn't really impact the special use permit issues that are before the board tonight, but it's another example of how we are being quite flexible to concerns we're hearing from the public, from the boards, and so forth.
Okay. Are we ready to start asking you questions? Because I have some, if you're ready.
I'm ready to stop talking so you can, I mean, ready for questions.
All right, I'm going to start with a couple things and then I'm going to turn this over to the board. As I looked at that and all the various, I'll start with a simple one. And you might wonder why I was so insistent about the square footage This is going to relate to materials, but the rendering seemed to show a pretty nice, almost all masonry building. But as an example, I happen to be looking at a 5.4 that was presented to us recently, the most recent drawing. And for materials on the outside, it now lists clapboard siding, vertical board and batten siding, masonry texture, stone veneer, and metal panel. And I'm trying to understand when I coordinate that with the renderings, it seemed to, I guess when you talk about, and this does make a difference to me, and it sort of has to do with the character of the neighborhood. And so I'm asking this because although we're limited, our jurisdiction, I said this before, has to do with two special use permits, one for the first floor, which we'll get to residential uses, but the other is the boundary. We are still bound by the criteria in general, however subjective they may appear, to at least examine the boundary based on that criteria. And so when I look at A5.4, it looks to me like it's mostly become a clapboard and board and batten building, which is not necessarily similar to the rest of the neighborhood, which is mostly masonry throughout downtown Plattsburgh. And so my question is, did that change from when you did those last renderings to A5.4? And I'm not saying they're good or bad products. I'm assuming, first of all, by the way, that it would be a cement board product, not a wood product, a pre-finished or my question is clapboard siding vinyl siding?
No, it's cement board, Ron.
Right.
Haven't changed.
Right. So,
as far as the generation.
Has this changed from have these outside finishes changed from when the renderings were done?
No, it's evolved, but it hasn't changed as far as the material palette. The massing has evolved.
Right. The amount of the different ones seems like it might have changed a little bit. So, but is this A5.4? Is there a date? I don't know if I see a date on it.
Which elevation is it?
129/2020. I'm assuming this is the last elevation.
Okay.
These are the ones that, like Charlie showed us, the 6-foot tall guy next to Bridge Street. This is all that that was presented to us. So I think that's the most recent. Okay. That was question one, is the outside materials and whether in fact they are similar to, you asked about what I'd like to see, and I've seen all these, and everybody says the other guys is wrong, and I'm not saying they are or aren't, all these renderings with buildings behind them, in front of them, taller, shaded, not. What would really help me to understand, and I don't need the architectural drawing of the existing buildings, I'd like to see the height on this straight on elevation sometime. I'm just telling you, it would make it easier for me, and I'm used to looking at plans. I'd like to see, like, here's the front of the building, and then over 65 feet or 60 feet, here's the edge of the building on the other side of Durkee Street, and this is how tall it is. Here's the building, and on the other side of Bridge Street, this is how tall it is. It would really help, and instead of, and I like renderings, and I get renderings, and I order renderings all the time, but it would really be able to say, this building is X amount above grade here, and this other one across the street is X amount above grade, or the grade's different, or whatever. And I know this building is taller. I know you're not saying that this building is the same height as the 4-story buildings or 3-story buildings, but it would help, and it might actually ease people's minds to understand that. So that's question number one to me, and I don't think it'd be that hard. You have them, just do a flat-on model. And then the other one is that as I look at these floor plans, and then I'm going to turn over the board, then I'm going to go over some other questions. But as I look at these floor plans, again, within the context of the boundary, our jurisdiction, right? The boundary and the amendment of the boundary, and first floor residential uses. That's what I really want to look at, how this affects the criteria. for those two parts of this, because you're right, the planning board is going to see most of it. And they're the ones that are going to talk about your parking calculation, which we can talk about a little bit. But it's really up to them under 36021 or whatever it is to tell you whether or not your calculation is appropriate and meets the needs of the project. But I am concerned about these balconies along Bridge Street. And I am, as it pertains directly, I'll tell you two things that I'm very concerned about. One, the balconies and I agree with you that by the time it becomes what I'll call a six-story building, even though it steps back at the bottom of Bridge Street, you're up on the second floor. But otherwise, as you're walking down that street, all of a sudden you're going to go from a commercial look to people out on their balconies barbecuing. And I would rather see, I'm just telling you my suggestions, and we haven't really questioned this as much as gotten information. I don't know why there couldn't be more commercial, even if you entered it as like an inside mall or not, along Bridge Street, and more residential where some of the commercial is, on the backside of the commercial, which faces the river, which is where the intended first floor residential uses were supposed to be. When we originally made that change, it was because we want to be able to look at the river from the first floor. Well, this isn't doing that. So I'm giving you my concerns. You're going to answer and say, we can't do it. Or just like you'll say, if I ask you, how come you need 115 units? You say that's the break point or something. I'm not saying I'm my way or the highway, but I'm saying these are my questions. So that I'm concerned about the material. I'm concerned about the residential use on the first floor. And the final one is that I'm concerned about being 3 feet from the property line. And I heard Gail say about trying to simulate that edge of sidewalk thing, but I think that that's okay when you're a 2 or 3 story building. When you're a 6-story building, and I've said every single time that you've been before me, every single time I said, why can't you move back to 15 feet off the sidewalk? Every single time. And nobody has given me an answer why, and I'm not going to buy into it. We'd have to move a transformer. That pertains directly to the planned unit development boundary. It happens to be the area where you are incorporating highway oil into the property, and it's where we are amending that boundary. And if you're asking us to amend that boundary so that you can be 3 feet from it, I find that problematic when you could only need to be 15 feet. So those are my questions, and I guess I'll start asking you, then I'm going to turn over the board after you start. We can keep going.
So what would you like answered first? Turner could probably address the setback part of it. Turner, maybe you want to start with that,
right?
About the balconies and the orientation.
It doesn't matter which order you take them in.
I can address the setback issue and maybe hand it over to Turner and Steve for some flavor.
Sure.
I would advise you to, certainly I defer to Corey on this. But I would disagree with your characterization of that specific question being within the jurisdiction of the PUD boundaries. That is a deviation that is requested from the planning board pursuant to 36021D. To the extent, let's say we are able to move it back 15 feet, which I can't even, in my own head personally, I think that looks odd in a downtown environment. I've lived in cities, smaller urban areas before, Saratoga Springs, for example, where I live now, where you have, you have buildings close to the sidewalk. That's an urban feel. But that is specifically a planning board issue. And say we are able to do that, that still doesn't affect the boundaries. The boundaries of the PUD would still go to the property line. That boundary is not then also moved back 15 feet to just include the building. The PUD boundaries would follow the property line. But Steve and Turner, if you guys can add a little bit more of, Steve, maybe the urban design of having close buildings to sidewalks.
Yeah, I think having a bit more generous, I'll call it the public realm run, is of value. One of the things we're doing along Durkee, for instance, is we have the covered walkway where you have access to the commercial space. And then there's a separate sidewalk in front of that. Some of that is, you know, practical consideration for how you finesse pedestrian movement around the transformers, because we know that wasn't really in the cards to move those. And some of that is also more room for landscaping. I think anytime we can take steps to add greenery anywhere in a downtown setting, that's a good thing. And I know some of that's the city's domain, but I would hope they would take advantage of that. I just happened to see out my window this morning. I live actually in Battery Street in Burlington, and I live slightly elevated actually from the sidewalk. It's virtually the same as, in fact, what we're creating here in terms of what I see looking out my window. But anyway, city's been going around planting some new trees because of the ash borer that's coming along. So the fact that we have a decent setback here facilitates doing that and greening up some of the streetscape. So, and I think really the more important thing is having a consistent edge, redefining the edge, as I think Gail mentioned earlier and Charlie as well. And I think that's one of the positive things about the project is restoring that aspect of how you frame the visual corridor and the pedestrian corridor.
Yeah. Oh, and sorry, Steve, just to jump in there. I mean, I think that's the real answer, Ron. I mean, the one spot you're talking about is the very northeast corner of the site, and the building is 3.5 feet back from the property line, right on that corner. The property line does taper away from the building as it goes up Bridge Street, but really the line of the building there was set to keep that visual corridor looking down Bridge Street from that top corner of Bridge and Durkee, and holding the visual line of that corridor to include the bridge itself. And that's really how the corner of that building got set.
And Turner, I think it's also important to distinguish between the difference from where the building ends and the property line, the 3-foot setback, and then the additional space beyond the property line that constitutes the public sidewalk before you actually hit the street.
Yep. Thank you, Matt. That's a good point. Because in that corner right there, the property line is well within the sidewalk. So it's roughly 9 feet from the corner of the building to the sidewalk in that location.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just be heard for a moment to address Charlie's point, and I appreciate the deference, Charlie. I think the point that you're missing is, I agree with you that D1 that you quoted allows the planning board to alter the boundary line and internal setback requirements within the PUD. What the chairman is noting is you are asking the zoning board to expand the location of the PUD. So once you're inside of the PUD, the planning board then can alter the requirements. But what the chairman is speaking to is placing the boundary line of that PUD in such a manner that would permit then the planning board to make that determination. So I think the chairman is correct that it is squarely within the zoning board's authority to ask questions relevant to the location of the building, because unless the building is inside the PUD, the planning board has no authority to alter the setback. And I think that's the point the chairman was trying to make.
Sure, I completely understand. And what I might suggest then is, because this is, not an issue that has come up before the planning board. So the planning board appears to be quite comfortable with the setbacks. It is within their jurisdiction to gauge the level of deviation that we are requesting. So that might, gain some weight, Ron, and maybe that eases your concern a little bit. The other thing, I wanted to point out, going on to Ron, your other concern that you had noted related to the elevations. And I just want to make sure that when we do some additional, these are the elevations that you would like to see the building heights on. Is that correct? The ones that I'm showing right here?
Yeah, but in a sense across the street, not those, no. If I look at, I'm going to tell you exactly, if I look at A5.4, Okay? That is a little different than mine, but anyway, maybe it's just the color. Across this, to the right of that, in front of that building on the right side is Durkee Street,
Yep.
right? Across the street on Durkee Street are buildings, right?
Yep.
I want to see the height of those buildings there, right where your arrow was.
Okay, so you want,
Yeah.
was our intent
The
to
buil-
show that,
Excuse me,
As a
Shai.
strict elevation, that on the
Yeah.
other side, looking from the side.
okay,
And the same thing. In other words, I don't want them in front of the building behind it. Right on A 5.4, let's say Durkee Street is 50 feet wide. I don't know how wide it is. And there's the building and the sidewalk.
sure.
I want to see the height of that building across on Durkee Street. It wouldn't hurt if you said, here's the tallest building, which happens to be Ashley's on the corner.
Yeah.
And here the grade goes down because Durkee Street slopes down towards
Yeah.
Broad.
Okay,
Here's at the
Ron,
other end of the building, and don't forget that the grade dropped down. Here is wherever the car place or the one of those
Yeah.
buildings
I
across the
completely
street.
understand. So put it into context, basically, not just a building in a vacuum.
yeah, I can
That's
tell
right.
you exactly
Across
what those
from
numbers
that-
are. Excuse me, Ron. The Ashley building is just under 50 feet, and our building is 61, so it's about a little over 11 feet higher if you compare the two sides.
Yeah, and I think that there's a general concept. I'm not saying anybody's wrong or right. That these things are towering over or not towering over. The applicant and everybody who likes it says that they're right in keeping. Everybody who doesn't like it says they're way bigger. This is nobody's going to say it's from down below or up above or from the side. Or it looks bigger, the big fish that you're holding up in front of you. This is exactly what it is. Ground level is 128 or whatever it is, and this is the height of this, and this is the height of that. And then there's no question, and everybody understands this is the height of the building as it relates to, and it does relate, by the way, both of these things. This all relates to the border because these things happen within this planned unit development, and the idea that we're doing something that still has to meet those criteria, it does affect how tall is this? Is it wise to have it? And I guess I'm going to tell you that 9 feet from the sidewalk's better than I thought, frankly. But is it better to move this thing back some so that it doesn't create a tunnel down Bridge Street? Is it, I don't know because I can't tell from what I've seen so far. It would help me understand that. And it might be, I look at it and go, oh, it's back far enough. I'm only trying to get the best information for this process. That's what I'm after.
Yeah. Ron, remember that photo simulation looking down Durkee that we had? Charlie, I don't know if you have that handy.
Yeah, I see that. But I think it'd just be easier. I've heard issues about, it's not a straight on elevation. I draw a lot of plans, Steve, and Turner, as you know, probably. So, and I'm way better at these kind of straight on elevations than I am at renderings by far. So I understand them better. They're easier to understand for everyone. Okay, these are beautiful. The renderings are gorgeous. They look really nice. They definitely
Appreciate
do.
that.
But
I can tell you again numbers for what it's worth along Durkee. Again, we're 61 feet.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Sidewalk.
We'll just say, here's this building, here's that building. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm gonna. I have plenty of questions, but I'm going to turn it over to other members of the board. This is how we do this. I ask a bunch of questions and I let them do it. So I'm going to turn this over to other members of the board to start asking some questions.
Hey,
if they feel
Ron,
like it.
I'm sorry, it's Dean. I just want to be sure that I understand. We're going to take a shot looking south on Durkee Street, and then we're going to show our elevation of our building, the elevation of the building, the buildings across the street as we go down.
That's
Durkee.
right.
So we're not going to be looking straight on the building. We're gonna be looking straight.
No, there's silhouettes of the building. Matter of fact, I wouldn't mind seeing a silhouette of the tallest one, which is Ashley's, and then the one behind it, or something like that. Just
Yeah, we'll do a
lines.
shot straight down, Durkee, and we'll show the elevation on
Yep,
both.
that's
I think
great.
that's a great
That's a great
idea.
idea.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you planning on doing the same thing for Bridge Street?
Yeah, I asked for both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
That rendering where it showed the other buildings, that's the first we've seen that one. And something that didn't seem quite right. So I'd like to see that.
Yeah, we can do that, Scott. That was done obviously for a different purpose, just to correct the perception, but we can certainly provide the separate elevations. And I think that'll be clear.
Well, and the only thing that kind of reached out to me is it shows a story and a half above the building on the corner, but the building on the corner is only a 3-story building.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry,
And,
it was a story and a half?
well, if you look at, if you bring up that comparison of Bridge Street,
Mm-hmm.
in the corner on the left, you're seeing one row of windows and just a
Right.
little bit below it. Yet that building that's at assumedly the same elevation is only a 3-story building.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, again, this is an approximation from Google Earth photographs, so it's always a bit tricky to get things exactly in perspective. But what we tried to get right was the relative height, because we felt that was the important consideration for what this is trying to show. So we'll do our best to compare the views separately.
Well, and this one rendering right here, we don't have. This was the first I've seen this.
This particular view?
Yes.
And this
Okay.
one was prepared in response to a comment we got before last week's planning board meeting.
Okay.
But we'll provide this in hard copy as well. We just didn't want to violate any submission dates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Actually,
you.
I want to clarify something, Charlie, if you don't mind about that. Scott, I'll let you get back, but public comments, we had some discussion about this earlier, but you're the applicant. You're not the public commenting. So you are not, although actually I was asked earlier today about Gail's PowerPoint presentation, and I said, yeah, no, just share the screen. Applicants often bring us stuff right at meetings. That is not unusual and does not violate, again, is the same thing. You're not subject to the same rules as the public comment portion.
Oh, I meant the, yeah, I completely agree. That's what we have here tonight. This is, was based on public comment we received at the planning board meeting. So we wanted to present it here this evening.
Great. I'm sorry, Scott, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. That's all I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Mhm.
I just had wanted to return to the sidewalk width discussion. I think the last comment was made, it might have been Matt, describing the 9-foot width. Can I just get clarification, or can we get clarification on the width of the sidewalk, proposed sidewalk, from the corner of Durkee and Bridge down to basically the end of the boundary line of this lot, just so I have a better understanding of that. I'm a little confused on it.
Sure. Turner, could you speak to the details of that down in the northeast corner?
Yep, so the sidewalk off the building is proposed at 4 feet. And then there would be parallel parking along Bridge Street to be determined by Bridge Street, similar to Durkee Street, has not been designed yet, but what we're accommodating there is a 4-foot sidewalk and then allowing for parallel parking to be designed.
So,
And actually,
so it would
Charlie,
still
could
be
you
right on the
scroll back 1 or 2 renderings to show there you go. I think that's easier for reference.
That's what I'm looking at. But are you saying the sidewalk is 4 feet wide all the way along that stretch?
Correct, heading up Bridge Street there, 4 feet wide.
I'm looking at a site plan that was sent to us that shows that, and it shows some parking and sort of a little island jutting out or a couple spots and maybe 5 or 6 spaces in front of the building, parallel parking spaces. But if I'm looking at this correctly, that means, oh, and then there's a slanted entrance to underground parking. That means that the pedestrians have a 4-foot wide sidewalk to walk along the north side of this building, and that's it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And when they get down to the bottom, I mean, I'm looking at this rendering that's on the screen now, and I see it steps back and so on. But when they get down it actually has to slant back out to get to the sidewalk of the. Boy, it doesn't look the same. It looks awfully wide where that crosswalk is on this compared to what I'm seeing on the site plan. So, and again, we're starting to talk about, I see the planned unit development boundary. And where it is it says 3 feet, but you're saying it's 3.5 feet. It looks to me like people are gonna walk along a 4 or 5 story, even though it's 4-story, by the time they get down near the bottom, it's 5-story at least, on a 4-foot sidewalk next to this building, and there's going to be cars or traffic right next to them. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Charlie,
so
could you unshare your screen so I could share the site plan just so everybody can see what we're talking about in detail? Thank you.
I have it as a paper copy.
Yeah, just so everybody who's watching.
Right. Okay. That is. Mine doesn't have all the writing on the side. It's got blue, but I think it's actually part of the set with the profiles that you provided. Is that right? Yeah. So what I'm saying is that along that building on Bridge Street, there's a 4-foot sidewalk for people to walk on. It actually narrows down to less. You see, that's all filled in with concrete there, but it's not on this site plan that I'm looking at. So I'm really confused now.
Well, Turner, identify where the curb line is versus the property line. I think that's part of the confusion.
Yeah, I mean it's filled in with concrete right to the property line, and I don't see where there's 9 feet to the sidewalk down at that other end, down to the bottom.
The curb is the lighter line, Ron, that's farther out.
Say that again?
The curb line is the lighter line farther out.
So this is the curb line, Ron, and this is the actual property line.
Right.
That's parallel parking lot spots on this one.
yeah, so the line there with the catch basin on it, that's the existing curb line, okay, of Bridge Street, right?
Where is? Right
here.
Right there.
Yeah. And so Bridge Street has not been designed, but the current plan is to add parallel parking along Bridge Street on that side there.
But on the other side, on the building side of that curb line, correct?
Correct. But there would be but you're right, but there would be then a consistent 4-foot sidewalk adjacent the building north to south.
Right.
Correct.
North of the building, on the north side of this building,
Sorry, you're right.
next to the building.
That's right.
There's a 4-foot sidewalk.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That is correct. That is
so
correct.
the walking area for pedestrians to walk down the north side of this building because there's parking next to it is 4 feet wide.
That is correct.
Yeah, I have a problem with that. I'm not going to mince words. I mean, if we're talking about a walkable community and streetscapes, let me tell you, you want to talk about Margaret Street, the sidewalks are 8 or 9 feet wide on Margaret Street or whatever they are. My family was merchants on Market Street for many, many years, okay? And that was always a big deal, cleaning your sidewalk, but they're big. They're not 4-foot sidewalks. And if we're gonna talk about expanding or amending the boundary of a planned unit development, and I understand the process of the planning board dealing with deviations. This is a deviation. They also need to meet the spirit of variances, and what it says is that they can grant variations when they feel that if a variance would have been required, it would have been granted. That's what it really says. So when we start to talk about that we're going to be 3 feet from the property line, and we're going to provide a 4-foot pedestrian-friendly area on the north side of a building where people are barbecuing, that mixes all my concerns together.
Turner, maybe I'm a little bit confused here myself. If the street on Bridge Street hasn't been, the streetscape hasn't been designed yet, the parking hasn't been designed yet, don't we have the ability to make that walk? You know, it may mean we lose some parallel parking, but is there a reason why it has to be 4 feet?
No, it could certainly be widened out. I mean, you have to look at Bridge Street and figure out what you can accommodate. So right now, in order to accommodate those 6 parallel parking spaces, we pulled it in close to the building, 4 feet off, to fit in those parking spaces. I guess to your point, go ahead.
I'm sorry, we might be able to get down to, because the line is skewed, right? So we might be able to make it work where it's at least 5 feet wide and maybe there's only 4 parallel parking spaces.
I'm concerned about that.
What's
I'm
that?
concerned about that because two people in wheelchairs can't pass each other on a 5-foot sidewalk.
Well, Turner, correct me if I'm wrong, but the minimum width requirement per ADA guidelines is 4 feet, correct?
Correct.
It doesn't make it pedestrian friendly, but I'm not trying to argue about pedestrian. My point here is that the reason what's the reason? Because we're trying to establish an amended boundary, and I'm going to keep going back to this because that's what we're here to. We have very limited jurisdiction, and we're going to end up deferring a bunch of this stuff to the planning board, no matter how comfortable or uncomfortable we are with that part of the process. Once we get to parking, we'll talk about that too. But the fact of the matter is that if you want this project to work and be approvable, it needs to meet the criteria. To meet the criteria, we talk about a bunch of stuff: parking, general character of the neighborhood. This neighborhood has wide sidewalks downtown. All of them are wide. You could go, I could ask you, maybe you should go and get the average width of all the sidewalks on all those streets near Margaret, the other side of Bridge Street, and all that, and take a look at them. Yeah, there's one along the parking lot, doesn't qualify, but on the other side, they're bigger, and certainly on the heavier commercial ones are bigger. But this again goes to my question that I've always asked, which is, why do you have to be 3 feet from the property line? If you were further back, you could have a more pedestrian-friendly thing and still the same feeling of those buildings that have wider parking, wider streetscapes. And I'm not trying to, this isn't a matter of, this is our job to do this, and this is what we're doing, and you expect me to ask these questions, I'm sure. And again, it's, when we talk about, now we're finding out that we're not 9 feet from the sidewalk, we're 9 feet from the curb. That's not the same as being 9 feet from the sidewalk. 9 feet from the curb, and we're gonna try, and then as they do the parking calculations in the different stuff, hey, we could fit 5 more spaces here. And they're gonna make it a 4-foot sidewalk, which does not keep in character with, and you're asking us to make a boundary that you can stay in character with the rest of the neighborhood. It's a concern.
Ron, if I may, and I made this same presentation to the planning board last week. This whole notion of the area variance standard, you're absolutely correct. We talked about the planning board meeting. We talked about specifically related to parking. And as you know, as a ZBA board, the idea is balance, right? How do we balance everything? Here, we are hearing major concerns related to parking. So we designed the building to get, parking spaces. We designed the sidewalks, as Matt pointed out, to be ADA compliant. I just did a quick Google search on what is the average length of a sidewalk, and it came back with 4 feet. So that was all part of our balance and design. So if we widen the sidewalk to be more than that average, more than that ADA compliance, and we do take a look at surrounding sidewalks, and we can do that analysis with the caveat that we might lose a parking spot. But again, it's trying to strike that balance, which we are trying to do, and we will continue to do, as to how do we give the parking spaces that the residents and the public want, with the setbacks of an urban environment and the sidewalks of an urban environment. So, your concern is noted. We will take a look at it, but I would like the board to remember that when you give a little here, you take a little there. And what we're trying to do is strike the balance between walkability and parking, which is often a difficult task. But I think we can probably have a discussion on that and, see what we can come up with, if not a clearer plan there.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, sorry, Ron, but just to sort of reiterate that, the way that is laid out is to try to accommodate those parallel parking on Bridge. And to go back to Dean's original point, certainly the sidewalk can be widened there. We'd need to work with the city to look at how and what that does to parking along Bridge Street.
I guess what it means to me is that if Bridge Street is not designed yet, it's hard for me to analyze without all the information exactly how I interpret this. It's one thing to say, well, we haven't done Bridge Street, so we don't know if we're going to put the spaces there. But what I can tell you is that, to me, just me, not the rest of the board, I find it unacceptable to only have, when you have a brand new lot, to only have a 4-foot sidewalk and a 50 or 60 foot tall building right next to it. I find that unacceptable, me personally. If the existing curb stayed and you said, never mind, city, you can't put 5 parallel spaces there, we're going to do this, it might be more acceptable to me. But to take the chance and say they haven't figured out Bridge Street yet, and by the way, they might take that away and give you a 4-foot space, influences how I feel about the boundary. And I'm not trying to, you want this done right. We want it done right.
Sure.
If you're going to get a project approved, it has to be approved so that it is beyond reproach. And the only way to do that is to be thorough. So when I expressed my concern about this, and now that I understand there's only going to be, if they do that, a 4-foot space, I'm more concerned. That's all. We'll deal with it. You can answer it. You can see what you can do.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight why,
Go ahead.
If the parking, the parking counts that were discussed in the EIS or the GEIS and so forth and so on, that part of Bridge Street was designed and discussed. Like I said, we tried to strike the balance. We hear you. We don't agree with the balance. Let's see what we can come up with. We'll talk with Dean. We'll talk with the city.
Thank you. Good. See what you can come up with. And then the other thing is, it's just the feeling of it. When you look at, and we talk about the general character of the neighborhood, which is a criteria, and how we establish its boundary. One of the things is to look at how it feels when something is right on the sidewalk, when the sidewalk is 8 feet wide, or however wide they are on Margaret Street, you know, and they're bigger. I'm just saying, this is part of how we deal with the boundary, and if you have to shift it over, I don't particularly agree with the parking calculations, frankly, but if we get the planning board to do it, you've got 10 extra spaces that you said you don't even need, that you can move the whole thing over and take 10 spaces out. I'm not, you know, I have some issues with the parking, and if everything is about the parking, then I still disagree with that calculation. I don't think we have any jurisdiction there, unfortunately. I can express my concern about why I don't think it would necessarily be a variance that would be granted, but more than the parking is how this fits or doesn't fit with it, and how it feels like it fits that general character. Is that germane to the boundary? I think it is. Some people would say, no, it's not. That's not your jurisdiction. It's none of your business what it costs us to build the building. It's none of your business to know our business model. None of that. I think it happens to be, but you're asking us to approve something. We need to make sure we're comfortable with it. That's all. Anybody on the board have other stuff to say?
I was just going to dovetail on that last topic of discussion, the walkability idea. I mean, that's repeated throughout the applicant submissions in a number of places and a number of responses. And it's not I'm not a planner by any means. I have no idea when I first saw that. For a long time, I didn't really know what that meant. I think I know what the applicant means, but I guess I would like a definition of that. How does having, it seems to me that the proposition is having narrower sidewalks and having more development, more higher buildings closer to the sidewalk improves walkability. What is walkability? What is a walkable community? Why is what you've presented going to encourage that? And why do some of these comments that we've just finished covering detract from that? And why is that a problem to have maybe a wider area to walk?
So, Steve, I'm going to take a shot at this first. You know, I've done plenty of revitalization projects. Most recently in the city of New Rochelle and the village of Port Chester. Very similar type projects. And you often hear the term that coincides with walkability is live, work, play. And actually, we're all living that right now. We're working where we live, so forth and so on. But if you just have a vacant parking lot that people drive to, right, that is not a definition of a walkable neighborhood. To have a walkable neighborhood, you need to have residences for people that live there to be the ones who are walking. And it means that you can live in a place where they can then go and walk and visit restaurants. If you work within the city, you walk to where you work. For example, if you live in our development, you would be able to walk out of your building, go down to the revitalized Saranac River Walk, and go through, the other pathways and parks that River Walk connects to. So I think the misconception is, it's not a park and therefore it's not walkable. But let's look at what's there now. It's an automobile-oriented use that actually demotes walking, right? So what we're doing is this is an urban walkable community. For those who, and I imagine you all live within the city, those who live in a downtown urban area, this is what happens. You want to live where you can walk to your city resources. And that's what is meant by a walkable community. It's not that we are going to drive to a location, and I'll use the sidewalk reference, for instance, drive to a location that has wider sidewalks just so we can walk on them. It means we want to live in a place where we can walk. And Steve, maybe you can just highlight some of the design elements of a walkable community, as I know you're pretty passionate on this topic.
Yeah, I live in that kind of circumstance. I've talked before about having moved from Shelburne to downtown, we used to drive everywhere partly because we had to be able to manage it. You know, one way to define it, I guess, is your comfort level with distance. You probably heard the term new urbanism. New urbanism concepts typically use a 1 mile radius, Kathleen, is one definition for walkability. That means being able to walk to, let's say, a pharmacy or a grocery store or a coffee shop, you know, things that maybe you like to use on a daily basis. Obviously, that's a function of age and mobility, of course. You know, some people have mentioned wheelchair factor. Of course, I think that's a totally different, but nonetheless important arena. Some people define walkability as car-free. There are plenty of examples of towns like downtown Burlington here where we have Church Street, where that's a far more, let's say, walkable circumstance in terms of going from store to store or in terms of what you can accommodate. There are towns in Europe like Strasbourg, France, that completely shut down the historic center and eliminated cars. And what they have is a public transit system so that you have to park outside the town and use public transit to get to any destination. It's been a huge success. In some cases, defying expectations of some so-called experts. So, and there's a lot more of that really in terms of what you find in Europe. But I think fundamentally, it is a function of distance to certain uses. So obviously that's got to begin with planning with that idea in mind, whether you stack different uses like housing over commercial or whether it's adjacent. It's really kind of the same concept if you're going to meet that standard. And I can tell you the other benefit besides the health benefits of people walking more and how that translates in other ways. We're down to 1 car as a family. We used to have 2 cars, and that translates into certainly cost. It translates into parking demands, obviously. And I think the other requirement should be that everybody have a dog, because there have been factors that demonstrate that people that have a dog are happier as well and walk more as well. So,
and if I might just add to that,
yeah.
if you look at other municipalities in the state, you have Port Chester, and you don't even have to look that far south. You can look at Albany. Albany recently did their zoning code. They are increasing residential development in the downtown area, and in some instances eliminating parking requirements, because they want people to live in these apartment buildings that have commercial on the first floor, and they want them to walk within the urban environment. And that's
Saratoga Springs as well, Charlie. Downtown T6.
Yeah, and that's the type of revitalization that is at the heart of this whole thing. And I hope that isn't lost.
Charlie, one other thing I think to me is really a very key part of this, going back to Kathleen's question, is the social aspect. You know, here we are on Zoom, for instance. We all know why we're talking on Zoom. There's a lot of shortcomings, certainly, to this way of communicating, but we don't have a choice. But one obvious benefit of creating a walkable circumstance is the social side of it. And it's something I've noticed. I've talked before about the fact that we live over in Italy part of the year and we can get there. But one of the things that happens when you walk is you encounter people. Dogs are a catalyst for talking to people and interacting with people. And again, that's a very important benefit of what we think this is all about. And again, that's a very key consideration in adding housing on a site like this. And I think that combined with reducing the impact of the car, again, for environmental reasons, but also for lifestyle reasons, to me, those things all fit together when you think about the benefits of a project like this.
Right.
And I've
Mr. Chairman,
experience too.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to ask Saratoga for their input on this particular issue, because this is a subject that is in their wheelhouse, walkability and improving streetscapes. So Dan and Emily, if you have anything to add.
Well, I would add, actually, we know Saratoga pretty well because we actually were involved with the design of the streetscape. Really the intent, you know, I'll absolutely defer to Emily on some of the details specific to this project. But particularly with the DRI, the intent of this is to enhance walkability and connectivity. So that's why we have the basically drawing from Margaret Street through the park area down to the waterfront. So, you know, clearly the goal and the intent of the DRI is to activate the downtowns and activate the waterfront through enhanced walkability. Emily, would you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree with you there. I think that's also going to be one of the highlights to the improvements that we're going to be working on for Durkee Street itself. If anyone's tried to walk on the existing sidewalk there, it's about 2 feet wide and you might get a parking sign in your face. So I think, you know, as these projects go forward, enhancing walkability is going to be really important just to provide that from one project to another.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to that too is also, you know, creating that conveyance from Brinkerhoff and Margaret down to the waterfront. That is going to be an area of connectivity and activation along the waterfront. And I know there was originally some criticism and concern, which you always like to hear from folks with respect to concerns about our designs, because our best designs are really the ones that are driven by the public. And you know, concerns about narrowness along the Riverwalk, concerns about safety, concerns about, you know, a little claustrophobic feeling. During the preliminary design process, it's very useful to get that information because for us, we incorporate it ultimately into what becomes the final design. So
okay,
I do want people to understand that along the waterfront, you know, these designs aren't developed in a bubble. We came up to help just show, kind of give a representation of what the waterfront would be with the Riverwalk, but ultimately, you know, materials, certain other amenities, lighting, video cameras, all these other things that are to enhance and make sure there's an adequate level of safety will look to be implemented as we go forward. So I did want to add that to the discussion.
I'd like to add my 2 cents in here. I'm hearing everything that you guys are saying about turning this area into a walkable neighborhood. And I don't disagree with most of what I've heard, but I want to reiterate what Ron said. And I think that what you said really kind of emphasizes the need for this sidewalk to be wider than 4 feet. Everything that you're talking about is describing bringing more and more people downtown to be on these sidewalks. You're going to increase the number of people that are passing one another. Strollers, dogs, like you mentioned. I mean, there are going to be supposedly a lot more people on these sidewalks. A 4-foot sidewalk is not a very wide sidewalk, especially when it's right on the side of a big building like this. And I'm looking at these renderings, and you have trees and lamp posts. You add that to the sidewalk that's only 4 feet wide, and you've significantly limited that walking space even more. So I want to put that out there. I don't disagree with the idea of creating a walkable neighborhood, but 4-foot wide sidewalk is a huge red flag for me as well.
I just want to follow up on that too, before I forget my points. So, I mean, the first part of the response to my question was how it's going to help the residents of the project, which I'm sure, you know, that has to be a consideration. But our concern and our mandate is to determine how it's going to benefit, whether it's appropriate for the wider community, not just the people who reside in that project.
Sure.
The other thing I want to point out, and the reason I asked about it is because it seems to have, that walkable neighborhood or walkable community concept seems to have come up in a bunch of places and I apologize, I didn't highlight in the paperwork that we have where I saw that, everywhere I saw that, I thought it was used as a response to, you know, basically all manner of criticisms of the project, but I couldn't really find a great example of that, but in looking for it, I did find, and this is in the February 21st McFarland Johnson letter, which was designed to respond to all the public comment that we had when we had our in-person meeting, I believe in February. And we had the personal appearances by members of the public. In that letter, page 11, comment 19 response was that the proposed sidewalks are proposed to be a minimum of 5 feet wide. So I don't know if that was originally the plan, if that changed, what changed. So that's something I wanted to clarify.
Sure. So I think we hear the point on the sidewalks, certainly. So let us, talk about that with the design team. As you can hopefully appreciate, this is not just a Prime design issue. This is a city street parking design issue. And I can tell you, if some parallel parking is lost, the next problem will be that the parallel parking is lost. So we have to strike that balance. And I just wanted to note one thing. I certainly did not forget about the other residents of the city of Plattsburgh. What I meant to highlight was the existing use of the property as a parking lot with pavement.
And I wasn't, just to clarify too, I wasn't comparing how does this project improve upon a parking lot. My question was more, how does this project improve walkability versus a slightly smaller project or a project with wider sidewalks? I mean, I wasn't asking you to contrast with an empty parking lot, obviously.
No, I just wanted to say
a parking lot is not a destination that you walk to.
Sure. And that's why this improvement will be to the benefit of all City of Plattsburgh residents. They can have a pedestrian pathway to a revitalized Riverwalk. And I, again, hope that that's not lost. But we will take a look at the sidewalk issue and yeah.
One of the things to point out is the 4-foot walkway, which we're going to certainly address to figure out if we can improve upon that. It's not the only way. I think from a landscape architecture standpoint, a walkability standpoint, part of what's going on here is people would much rather walk along the river and up our meandering walkway that's all landscape to get up to Durkee Street, likely, than straight up that walk. And if they were going north, they'd probably cross the road and go up the other side. If they were going south, the chances are, I mean, I know personally, I'd much rather walk along a river and up a nice landscape path to get to Durkee Street. So it's not like this is the only accessibility that we're providing from our project to Durkee Street. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, Dean, that's a really great point, because the idea would be to walk from and through and enjoy the Arts Park through the pedestrian walkway down to the Riverwalk and then onto Bridge Street.
I'm sure that was the intent of the LA group. It was part of their, I mean, I can't speak for you, but I'm assuming that's part of what your concept was for that.
You bring up the Riverwalk, and there's not much information in this package about dimensions on the Riverwalk portion relative to the bank. It does narrow down at one point. Do we know how narrow that is?
Sure. So I'll hand it over to Saratoga Associates, because that is not our application and not on our site plan, in other words. But I just want to point out my April 10th letter does address some of those issues and talks about the width. But Dan and Emily, I hand it over to you guys.
Thanks, Charlie. All yours, Emily.
Yeah, so is there a specific part that you had a question on, or I can just run through the full length?
It's mainly as applies to the planned unit development, the boundaries. And there is an area where it does seem to narrow down relative to where the bank is. And I'm assuming there is not an intention to build that bank out any farther.
No. So our design keeps all of the Riverwalk, including where the curvilinear path comes through the center of the proposed development. We have an overlook area, so that's a wider point where overall it's about 20 feet of pavement. But that all remains behind the top of the bank. And in addition to that, beyond the pavement, if you're talking, if you're thinking about the edge of pavement being the top of the bank and working your way back toward the buildings, There's about 22 feet overall of pavement, plus there's additional planting space before you actually reach the edge of the building. The narrowest point of the Riverwalk, so the intention is for it to also serve as a shared use path. So there's a minimum of 10 feet width of pavement that's clear. So the narrowest point of that actually occurs in front of the ICB garage. That's actually our pinch point, not the Prime building. So that is 10 feet, but there is still some planting space between the Riverwalk pavement and the garage building. Working your way back toward the existing farmers market building, we have 12-foot wide minimum width of pavement there, but we also have provided planting space. So there's landscape bed between the edge of the pavement and the building. And as you move kind of to the southern part of the U, and you start to head up toward Bridge Street, we maintain at least a 12-foot width, and we open it up to a 14-foot width.
Emily, one thing I would ask you to do is clarify the definition of pavement.
Okay.
I mean, it's not asphaltic. I mean,
we haven't fully fleshed out the details. Our intention is a mix of concrete and pavers. We haven't looked into stormwater detailing yet, so that'll influence our final.
I just want to make sure everyone didn't think it was just an asphaltic strip we were putting down there.
So the part from approximately where the courtyard area is in the development out to Bridge Street, there is a minimum of 14 feet wide. And then as you actually reach Bridge Street, the rendering you saw where you're on Bridge Street and you see somebody with a bike in the corner of the building there, that overall width is actually 35 feet. There is sort of an island inserted into it to accommodate a bike rack and a few benches. And that is overall approximately 8 feet off of the building. There's a planting strip there. So there's a generous amount of width, I would say. And it all does remain behind the top of the bank.
Okay, thank you.
And that 8 feet is kind of the 3-foot setback that right now it looks like there's not only a 3-foot setback from Bridge Street to the building, but a 3-foot setback from the Riverwalk retained lot to the back of the building. Is that correct?
I think it on the latest version that I had in my plan, I had about 8 feet overall. I think 5 feet or so was technically on the Prime potential property, and about 3 feet or so of green space would remain.
Wait, it's a 4-foot setback. I apologize. I'm looking at the wrong thing. It's
so
4
overall
feet.
it's about 8 feet of green space.
So where
at the narrow point,
where that corner is, that's where it narrows down to the smallest 12-foot wide area.
it's actually 14 feet there of Riverwalk,
14 feet
of the main
Right.
course. Yeah,
And that does not include the setback,
correct.
so it'd be 18 feet to the building.
If you wanted to measure from the furthest out edge of pavement to the building, I think it'd be closer to about 20 to 22 feet. I think there's about 8 feet of green space at kind of the narrowest point at Bridge Street. And then there's 14 feet of our proposed pavement width before you reach a planted island.
Right. So there's 4 foot of setback and then sort of a space and then the paved area that's 14 feet wide. And you're saying the 4 foot plus 4 foot space plus 14 is around 22 feet to the bank, correct? To the top of the bank.
No, that's so the top of the bank. If you're at Bridge Street, the top
I see is further.
a little bit of a ways away. There's an existing wing wall for the bridge there.
Okay.
So it's actually about
Is there
40 feet or so.
Gail would know this maybe, or somebody, or Turner. Is that a variation, the 4 foot setback listed? Is that one of the variations listed for the planning board?
Yes, I believe it is.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
And Ron, I'll just highlight the reason for the design of the lots that is in the PUD subdivision before the planning board is so that the city retains waterfront property.
Right. I think there's been some discussion by people about whether that's all of the waterfront or not. That's another whole topic.
I haven't heard
That's
that.
not our, that's not in our jurisdiction. No, some people think that that waterfront should stretch back, and I believe I've seen a figure of 100 feet. I'm not kidding. I'm not saying that's true or not true, but
Sure.
there has been discussion about, this all goes back to this whole, whether the city could disperse waterfront, saying that the area behind the waterfront is still waterfront because it was originally waterfront. That's not in our jurisdiction, so I'm not going there. I do want to, Charlie, though, ask you about, or mention to you that you said, in Albany, they're doing this, and somebody said in Burlington, they're doing that. We're absolutely not Burlington. I pride myself, frankly, on the fact that we're not Burlington anymore. People used to say we could be and should be, but I don't think we should. And we certainly aren't Albany. And the urban atmosphere, and I lived in the 70s, early 70s in downtown Albany on Lancaster Street. So, and I walked all over because I didn't have a car. So
Right.
that was walkability in the 70s, right in the central district or whatever they call that, right when they were rehabbing all those units. So I understand it, but our walkability is different. And I live 3 blocks from downtown or 4 blocks from downtown and walk downtown. So I understand walkability. I am concerned, and I know you've already said you'll deal with the parking lot. I'm sorry, with the sidewalk. It brings me to when we talk about this parking lot and how parking lots don't promote walkability, you and I are actually on the same page, Charlie. And I quite agree. I have a major concern about your parking calculations only because of the precedent I think they set, and I don't particularly agree that it's a proper formula. That's another whole topic. But I do agree that eventually, when downtown changes, which it will, whatever happens here, people that live downtown will not as many people that live downtown will own cars anymore.
Mhm.
And downtown should become and will become, if we do our job zoning and planning wise, walkable and livable for people and a desirable place for people to live that don't own cars, and it can rely on a more expanded public transportation system. So the big whole thing about whether or not how many spaces we have for the public, and I understand it's a concern today, but we're not planning for today, right? We're planning for 5 or 10 years from now, whenever it is, when we can get back out of our isolation and quarantine to be able to walk around downtown. So I am concerned about the parking, and I did want to talk about that a little bit, and the parking calculation, which is not our jurisdiction, but is similar to what would have been in any other development, not a planned unit development, would have been a variance. And I think that there's an issue here, because if you go from 319 spaces to the 286 you're providing, I can see how you might say, look, it's really a bigger project. It's a little different, but it's 10% difference or something or whatever. And it makes sense because, it works in the business plan, and I'm a little confused now, because in the midst of all of this, the farmer's market has turned into a whole other thing, and I don't know how exactly. I know it fits the parking, but I'm confused about it a little as to and the jobs created. I was looking at trying to find the correlation between the 32 workers that the GEIS says are created, the permanent workers for this thing, for the commercial part, and then the half a space per worker in the calculations. I kind of got lost on that. But the major thing is that I think that within the spirit of the ordinance, I just want to address this, of the planning board under being able to allow the applicant an alternate method of calculation that can support the project for parking, does not mean that we could just say, well, we think this is okay. And we think this will work for whatever reason. It should be demonstrated by actual calculations or surveys or something. And I don't see that here. And that's something else I wanted to bring up. And this affects the boundary, because we're talking about within this boundary creating parking for the public. And you're saying that we have 50 spaces for the public left because we only need 226, but we're going to say 236 to be safe, based on the Hamlet. And I'm not saying Prime is not truthful. Don't let me imply that. But because Prime says that we've never had a problem at the Hamlet with parking, and this is the calculation we use at Saratoga, and again, we're not Saratoga or Burlington or Albany, we're Plattsburgh. It's a two-edged thing for me. One, I don't mind if you only provide 286 spaces, but I just don't think there are 50 extra spaces left, because I think it sets a precedent that I'd be very concerned about if the general public applicants and the general applicants and developers around, the minute we say, yeah, it's part of the plan unit process, but go ahead, you can give us an alternate calculation, are going to come to us for some other multifamily project and go, I've got 4 other places, I got college kids. They don't have that many cars. I don't need that many spaces.
Sure.
Here's my alternate calculation. I know it's not, but we're going to hear it forever and ever. I find that I'd more honestly rather see you be truthful and say we need the 286 spaces or we can use those. That's an alternate calculation. Unfortunately, we're not providing 50. I know that's not politically correct or advantageous, but it seems more truthful. And I am concerned about a 90 space variation that I can tell you would never get if in the spirit of a variance, we would never give somebody a 90 space variance. Just would not happen. Now, the planning board might believe we would, but I don't think I've ever given one, nor could I. But I wanted to at least address it.
Sure. So if I may, there's a lot there, and hopefully I can address it. You're right. You're not Burlington. You're not Portchester. You're not Albany. You're Plattsburgh. Those, however, are examples of communities who are going through the revitalization process. White Plains, I think Kingston is currently going through a process, Saratoga, but Plattsburgh has to take the first step. So those are provided as examples, and it can't be a coincidence that those municipalities are enacting the same zoning regulations. Those municipalities are targeting for dense multifamily mixed use development. That is no coincidence. That is what triggers revitalization. We believe this works for Plattsburgh, but certainly Plattsburgh has to put its stamp on it. Now, related to the parking, I will submit, and I understand you are not saying we're lying by any means, but we are providing fact and we are providing documentation. We have provided to the planning board the documentation that was provided and approved for in the Hamlet development, where I have personally lived. That was approved by the city of Saratoga. That has been operating for a number of years. That's not fiction. That is a real life example of a similar development, somewhat about 0.8 to a mile outside of a downtown core, where that parking is working. Going a step beyond that, the overall parking scheme has been assessed in the GEIS and confirmed by the Carl Walker parking study. Again, not fiction, fact. Now let's take it one step further. The building inspector, who is intimately involved with parking in downtown Plattsburgh, has provided support for this parking. So it's not just us, I understand, I've done this a lot of times, that what the applicant says is placed through the ringer, and oftentimes I am just perceived as not telling the truth. I get it. But all of these things combined show that this parking works. Can we be completely positive that anything in this world works? Of course not. but this is the evidence before you, and that's what you have to weigh. So let's take a look at the parking and go to your concern that you would have never issued this area variance. Where in fact, I believe an area variance from your board, like I believe the deviation from the planning board is completely acceptable and appropriate. First of all, I think your main concern is this variance substantial, right? One of the many factors. But what we have to look at is the benefit sought by the applicant, does it outweigh any detriment to the community? That is the test. Those 5 factors that follow help you assess that test, but that's the test. So when we talk about substantial, right, there's cases out there that we've provided to the planning board, happy to provide to you, that say it's not a mere numerical evaluation. So 90 more parking spaces? No, that can't be the case. You have to look at it a totality of the circumstances here. Where are we? What is the context? What is the mission? What is the policy that's driving? And here we have provided that to the planning board. I'm not sure if this board has seen that, but we believe that the benefit to the applicant outweighs the detriment to the community because we've demonstrated our parking demand on the record. And we know that we feel that it works. So, you know, I'm happy to run through the area variance standards for this board, despite the fact that it is a planning board issue. And then precedent. I hear this a lot in every municipality, and I completely understand the concern. There's a line of cases out there that follow one Court of Appeals decision, Knight v. Melkin. And Knight v. Melkin says that where a local land use board or an administrative agency makes a determination, that determination is precedent for future applications of the same fact. However, if fact is different, that precedent doesn't apply. Here in the city of Plattsburgh, I feel like this board or any board shouldn't worry about precedent. You have such a unique property here, right? You're in the downtown area. You're in the downtown core. You have a river walk adjacent. You're putting a pedestrian pathway through. You know, there's a million different reasons why this parking scheme works here and it wouldn't elsewhere in the community. You know, if you have a development in the future that's not in the downtown core, you can, you know, that's one reason why the precedent wouldn't stick. We're happy to provide that analysis for you. I've done it in several other instances, but precedent isn't a worry here because of the unique characteristics of the property and the development itself.
And Charlie, speaking further to the uniqueness of this situation, Mr. Chairman, we're also talking about a project that is proposed not only within a planned unit development, but also a planned unit development within an overlay special assessment district that comes with its own special rules governing off-street parking regulations.
One point out too, Ron, and I don't think it's come up in any of the previous meetings, but what we'll find is a lot of people who are parking downtown right now are likely going to be living in the apartments and walking to work. And that's what a lot of this is about. So I don't think any of the parking analysis really, because it's impossible to quantify, but I can bet that probably 30 to 40% of our tenants are going to be within walking distance of the project, within a mile or so. So that's something that really hasn't been discussed, but it's something that probably should be considered.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to tell you that aside from all of this, I am concerned about it, and precedent is a word, whether it's legally a word for us or not. It sets up, we get people every month come in and say, look, 4 other people on my street built their porch out that far. You have to let me build it out that far. And it's similar, and you're saying that's okay. It's not so much the exact thing of how far a porch comes out here anymore. It is the idea of using an alternate calculation. The calculation might be different than yours because the area is substantially different than yours. But on multifamily housing in particular, more even in commercial, on multifamily housing, a chief tool of the zoning board is and has always been parking to use to control density. And especially here, this is not only an urban area, it's a college area. There's a lot of what I don't call it college housing. There's a lot of young adult housing or young adult semi-professionals and blue collar workers. And I don't know who are going to be living in the apartments necessarily, but this is an area where we struggle with density in residential neighborhoods. And it's one thing to say, yeah, but we're downtown, we've got the Riverwalk. It's still, I'm just telling you my objections. We don't have actually jurisdiction here. I'm telling you that I think that because you're saying within this boundary, some of your property is going to be still used for public parking, like most of your property was originally, it goes to the parking, goes to the boundary special use permit. That doesn't mean that we have jurisdiction over how your calculation is determined, or in fact, whether or not it's approved, because we don't have any. And I could sit here all night and tell you that I don't like it or do like it, or somebody could say they doesn't matter. In the end, it's going to be the planning board. And I don't know, has anybody in the planning board has said to you, we don't like your parking calculation? Maybe they haven't. That's not our jurisdiction. It's only for us because one of the 5 criteria is parking. And we're talking about the parking district-wide now, and the special assessment is being calculated using 50 spaces on your property within that planned unit development boundary. That's why I'm bringing it up. It does not mean that we have jurisdiction to say to you, if you don't change the parking, you don't get the SUP. It means that I'm bringing it up because I believe that it's a criteria that's important to the boundary, to the entire planned unit development, because it's a public use. You're not only talking about being self-sufficient. It's easier if you just said we did a calculation, we only need 200 and something spaces. But when you start to say that we're providing this for the public, it opens it up to that whole, whether this planned unit development affects the parking for the district-wide, because the parking tables show that there's still a loss. I don't personally have a problem with it because I like to promote, I think we need to promote walkability and public transportation. I'd rather see a bunch of money go to getting more buses so that I could walk to my corner and ride downtown, go to the co-op, pick up my groceries and go home.
Sure. Well, I will say that this was globally addressed in the GEIS process.
Right.
You know, that is the environmental record on the more global parking, specific to our site and the PUD boundaries. As I mentioned, you know, we can only point to the information we have, and the information we have from the site shows the parking works.
I'm just bringing it up. So,
can I jump in here?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Meg.
So I was just wondering if at all possible, we could kind of combine 2 visuals that we have, the one with the 6-foot man, and then the A5.4 rendition that we have now. I think that would be helpful just to see where the balconies that Ron was talking about earlier.
Sure. Did you want me to pull those up? Is that what you said? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I have them in front of me, but so just
on our rendering.
This one, if we could put that little man on this one.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Just so we can see the man versus where the balconies are. Height-wise, I think that would personally be helpful to me.
Does the scaling allow us to do that, Steve and Turner?
Yeah, I think if you can pull the 2 up together, Charlie, or at least sequentially.
Well, why don't we,
give you an idea.
why don't we, I think it's a good idea when we're doing the renderings that Ron requested before. Let's just do one more. Let's drop a couple people on the actual rendering, because
sure.
I think that's what you're looking for, Megan, and I think that's gonna.
Yeah, Ron, how tall are you?
What's that?
How tall are you?
5, 7 and a quarter.
Okay, we'll show that too.
One of
Dean,
the
you're
rules,
what? Dean-
Ron.
Megan, that's what you're
He's a
looking for,
person.
right, Megan?
Yes.
Well,
You're looking-
Everybody's taller than I am, so, and you
No.
should do it on both, if you could, do it on both Bridge and Durkee Street. That'd be
Sure.
fantastic. Good idea, Megan.
Okay, actually, Dean is shorter than you, Ron, I think.
No, I got
Yeah,
it by a
and-
quarter inch. Huh?
I think so.
I got you by a
Yeah,
quarter
yeah.
inch, Ron. We're gonna go back to back.
Yeah, Megan, right. Megan, do you have more?
Yep. So same thing, going back to sidewalks though, specifically near the parking garage entrance on Bridge Street. This image here, that makes the sidewalk look massive next to the parking garage entrance, but of course, we just spent an hour talking about how it's, what, 3 feet? So I don't know if you can create that image more specifically to that area. With
I
the
think,
sidewalk being as narrow as it is there, I'm also very concerned about the parking garage entrance being there.
Yeah, Megan, so this is Turner. So that's the one spot where we did bump the sidewalk out and we've pulled it to basically to the existing curb line where it's roughly 9 feet off the building. But again, we'll work with the city and the parking to make sure that can all work. But basically in proximity to the garage entrance, we've held the existing curb line and moved the crosswalk out in that location to provide some additional space.
Okay.
But we'll take a look at all that and how that works with what we can do along Bridge Street for sure.
Okay. Can you also possibly do? I don't think I have an example of it, but the parking lot side of the building. I guess we'll call it the south side of the building.
The south side, Meg?
Yeah. Just again with
Facing,
the man versus the balconies on that side of the building too. If we could just get those all the way around, I think that
Okay.
would.
So show a figure in relation to the building.
Yep.
Someone walking down the pedestrian walkway.
Sure, okay.
yeah, because all you're gonna do is you're take your A5 drawings, right, Steve, and you're just gonna put these on the A5
Right.
4s
Yep.
and 3s. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I just want
We're not
to
trying
be
to create a
sure.
lot of extra work for you.
No, not really. I just want to be sure we get you what you need on
Right, right.
Durkee, so we can have probably a Google Earth snapshot of the other side of Durkee and put that on a drawing at the same scale.
Yeah, if you want, I only care about a silhouette of the building. That's really what I
Okay.
care about, to see the heights.
But do you want
Do
to
you know
see
when
them on the same page, or can they be on separate pages?
Yeah, right on the, in other words, A5.4 across the street,
Uh-huh.
you know, I don't care if you're showing all the way to Margaret Street. I want to see that back, the building on the other side of Durkee Street.
Mhm.
And we want little people on each side.
Okay.
One
Right?
paper would be awesome. We
people.
don't need to flip.
No,
I'm sorry,
I'm
Megan.
serious. I'm not
I'm
being
sorry.
sarcastic.
Megan, I'm sorry.
I'm serious. Do you know when you might have that?
I would think by the end of this week, if not sooner.
Okay, I'd like to be able to, if get it sent, and if it's what we want, I'd like to be able to post it
Okay.
on the city website as part of the application,
Mm-hmm.
so that it can be seen.
Okay.
When we get it, we get it. I mean, I'm not pushing it, you know, but I think it's pretty. I mean, we're not done yet here, but we're certainly not going to be we're gonna need some more information. We don't even have anything near a resolution to discuss yet. Our next, just as a brief interlude here, our next meeting is on the 18th. So we would want to be trying to push stuff, get this together so that on the 18th, hopefully we can try and get some stuff prepared and take a look at what fits, get new information. I think you mentioned there were some other changes coming because of the planning board anyway, correct?
Yes.
Minor ones or something, I'm not sure what. Did you talk about some changes to the building or?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, okay. So we'll take a look at that. So we've touched on the 3-foot setback, the 4-foot sidewalk, the parking, we got a lot of public comments. I guess I should talk about that a little bit. And I want to classify them in different ways. And I know the public is listening. I'm assuming they're listening. Maybe they've gotten bored. I don't know. But so we had comments at various meetings that you came to and did informationally for us from the public spoken comments and some written ones. And then we hit this pandemic and we didn't know how to do the meetings exactly. And we worked it out, but we didn't have we tabled everything at the one meeting, and then everybody was mad because we didn't read their comments at that meeting, but we didn't do anything. That was the March meeting. Then we said we were going to have a special meeting in April, early April, and we still didn't read the comments because there were so many of them, and we got confused again and said that we were going to have people be able to speak, which they did. But it got so late because, as is our tradition, we do the little variance applications first and the big ones at the end. And so by the time we got to 11:30, we weren't going to start reading them. And I think that it's become our position that to be part of the record and be understood by the board and the applicant, they don't have to be read thousands and thousands of words, and we understand that they're important. But some of the ones from the original, before the April 6th meeting, talked about the fact that it wasn't fair that the public couldn't participate. And so that sort of became a moot point. Then we got the next set, and now we've got even more. And they're going to be posted, if they aren't already. Shalice, have they been posted on the website, the comments, or no?
Anything
have the-
posted through the date of the deadline? I think that was last Tuesday.
Right.
Anything through there is posted. On the planning board webpage, anything that is current through 10 a.m. today is posted on the planning
Right.
board page.
So if they're not, they will be, and they are going to become part of the record, even if they were for us after the deadline. But, this has been a process for the public to watch, and here we are, we're in the middle of this, but anyway, we've got a whole bunch of don't let them do this, anti, a lot of opposition. We've lately been getting several people saying it is good, it is, and advocating for the project, both. So, and many of them are similar, and I can go through and say, all these people wrote it, but some of them are very lines are posted, they're part of the record. But I do want to ask about, because I think it behooves us to ask, is there any way to make the project smaller? I mean, I know the plans are done, they're not done, but the concept is done. But, and we heard about 115 apartments. That's the break point. The plan doesn't work. And I guess I'm going to tell you that I just want to understand from the developer and the city standpoint, but especially from the developer standpoint, two things. One, can it or should it be made smaller? Not necessarily because it's too big for the neighborhood, which it might be, but because of the changes in economic times The fact that we've just gone through a pandemic that up until early March, nobody really thought was a big deal, and it has shattered much of the concept of the world and how we do stuff. We were just talking today about the fact that nobody's going to ever go back to their office. We're all just going to remotely work from now on because it's so much better in your sweatpants. But the fact of the matter is that this is a changed world, and I don't think we could be considered thorough if we didn't ask this question. Can it be made smaller? Should it be made smaller? If not, why not? And I'm not, I don't know, but I'm going to tell you, I build a lot of stuff. I know about building, and it's 200,000 square feet. I asked you this before, and I think I saw somewhere there's $2 or $3 million worth of design and soft costs and other costs on a $25 million project, or maybe there's some general conditions. I don't know. But you're at $100 and something a square foot, which is tough to do, A. And again, this isn't my jurisdiction, but I feel that we need to ask you this as a board. We need to ask you, have you thought about making it smaller, taking a floor out, shrinking it in some way? You wouldn't need as much parking. Is there a reason that it has to be this big? And so there's the question.
I will, I'll start and then I'll hand it over to Dean.
Yeah, okay.
One thing I will say is we have made it smaller, right? Turner earlier today went through where we started back in November of 2018, what, a year and a half, ago. And now we're down to 115. And we are, continuing to look at things. But, now we've reached that 115 moment, and it's real. And that's the count. But I'll hand it over to Dean to kind of address why that's the number, and your other considerations.
Yeah, and a good question, very good questions. As far as the pandemic goes, I mean, we last week, as an example, we rented 23 apartments. We have not changed our pricing. If anything, on our turnovers, we usually have a 1% or so increase in price. I think one of the outcomes of this may be, and it already is, becoming more difficult to get financing to purchase a home. So there's going to be more and more of a need, we feel, for quality housing. So as far as being concerned because of the pandemic and also the timing of when we're going to come to market versus the pandemic, we're not overly concerned on the residential. The commercial is going to be more of a challenge than it would have been before this happened. But we're just going to have to go after the types of tenants that are going to continue to be strong. And we have ideas on that, but that's going to be more of a challenge. As far as the size goes, as Charlie said, we already have made it smaller. Expense ratios are a huge part of apartments. And if you're trying to really manage, a Class A apartment complex, you got to keep your expense ratios at a certain point. And as you get lower and lower in the amount of units, your expense ratios go up and the math doesn't work. So the math where we are now is where we feel comfortable with this project. We've come down from where we would have liked to see the project based on public comments and concerns, and it's part of the process. So would we be interested in a smaller project? I would say at this point, no. Do we feel confident about what we're doing? I certainly would not be on this call right now, and we wouldn't still be going at this and spending money if we weren't confident that we could get it done. But I do agree there's going to be more challenges, especially on the commercial side. But you lack product in Plattsburgh. You don't have hardly any Class A product. Class A product is going to help your businesses to attract employees. It's going to help businesses coming into town when the HR people say, hey, what kind of housing do you have? What's a housing stock look like? Where our people live? There's a lot more benefits than just the housing for the community. And we just, the lack of this type of product anywhere in your MSA, your entire MSA, it's lacking right now. And it's something that we're very confident that there's going to be a demand for. So.
Why is, you bring up the Hamlet? Why is this so different than the Hamlet? I believe the Hamlet only has 140 some odd apartments.
145, yes.
Okay. So what is the difference?
Difference, I'm not sure I understand your question, Scott.
Well, and they're in multiple buildings.
That's
and they're
right,
only-
yeah.
And they're only 3 stories high.
We have 6 buildings there. We have more acreage. And they are, no, we have building 3 is the same height as this. It's 4.5 stories over mezzanine. Building 6 is the same height as this. Building 3 and 4 are not as high. And then the other is a fresh market retail, so they're not. But the residential, we have 2 of them are similar height, are slightly smaller.
And on the streetscape, they look a lot different.
Yeah, you might be looking at a rendering of what we call building 4 and 5, which are more just, there's not any brick on them. There's just cultured stone and clapboard. Those
I'm actually looking at the photos on your website.
okay. Of which buildings, I guess.
Hard to tell. It's going down the hill, and the buildings are on the right. I think you
Buildings
come
on
down.
the right going down the hill, that's building 4 and 5, where the waterfall is.
Yes.
Yeah, those are the smaller buildings. The one on the left, if you were down on that similar situation where the site slopes down. So if you were down on Excelsior,
yep,
back up, it would be very close to the same height that we're talking about. Building 6, which is behind the Fresh Market building, is similar in height as well. The other 2 are slightly lower. And a lot of parking drove the deal and just getting to the right size for parking them on the units.
Okay. Thank you.
You know, Ron and the rest of the board members, one thing I'd like to say is, as we kind of showed tonight, we've been at this since November 2018. The process has worked. I believe the building has changed as a result of board and public comments. Is there anything else that this board would like to see outside of what was discussed this evening? So that at the next meeting, it might be a possibility that this board takes a vote on the applications. And I say that because, you know, we've been at this a while. The project has kind of been through the hearing process, been through the deliberation process. In addition to the planning board also is awaiting your determination on the SUPs to go forward with their determinations. So it would appear as though the planning board is waiting for this board to act. And so I want to make sure we get this board everything they can to be comfortable with the project to the fullest extent possible for the next meeting.
Well, my major questions, and I'll be waiting to see what your answers are, and you're working on them for me, are the 3-foot setback, the 4-foot sidewalk, the balconies. We didn't talk too much about that. That's one thing. We didn't talk about residential uses on the first floor. I kind of got sidetracked. I do, but I have how we relate stuff to the boundary, and some people might say I'm not being as pushy as I could about the boundary one, or some people might say I'm outside my jurisdiction. But how this relates to the boundary and that special use permit is one thing. A more easily defined special use permit right now is the use of residential uses on the first floor. It's more easily understood when we realize that back when this area was changed, the size of planned unit developments were changed to 3 acres. You're 3.7, I think, this one. and the concept of redeveloping this lot, because, and I'm going to say redeveloping because years and years ago, right, it was a whole bunch of buildings there. Many years ago, but then it became a parking lot. Why? Because they tore all the buildings down. In the process of redeveloping this lot, one of the things they talked about was that we would allow residential uses on the first floor, which is not allowed anywhere downtown, and for a very specific reason. We didn't want apartments on the first floor. We wanted to encourage a retail environment. Now, I'm a little concerned, to go back to the pandemic question, about how many stores that are downtown now are going to survive, much less the difficult job, Dean, that you have trying to think about marketing new space at new building costs as opposed to landlords who've owned their buildings for 25 years or something. But the real question is what happens on Bridge Street? And one of the things I'd like you to explore when I look at the floor plan itself for level 1, I guess what I want to know is if you could create more. First of all, I'm concerned about, I really am concerned about the balconies on the Bridge Street side, and people hanging out in some cases 4 feet or 6 feet or whatever it is above the sidewalk. Okay, I think that still takes away from the commercial feel. So one of the questions might be to think about before you come back to us, could you make that, especially as these people are coming down this corridor and walking down Bridge Street to go to the waterfront, more commercial all the way, where even if they had to go in just like they'd enter for the apartments, and put some of those apartments over on the back side of the commercial. In other words, not have as much commercial just on Durkee Street and more commercial on Bridge Street. And I just
there's a couple of reasons
I'd like to
why.
look at that.
Yeah, maybe I can address that. There's 2 reasons why that's going to be very difficult to make work. Again, we're going to have a challenge with retail and having retail stores that are only 30 feet deep or 32 feet deep. It's difficult to rent that. We need a deeper retail space.
Right.
So if we did go to put apartments behind, now we're making less marketable retail, and also along Bridge Street, from a retail standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense because of the grade. I would, and I think Megan's idea about putting people so you can see them on the Bridge Street side, even though it's first floor, it really reads as a second floor because of the slope going down.
Oh, I understand. I agree.
And maybe one of the solutions, Ron, is to take the balcony that Steve said was the first balcony in from the corner of the Bridge Street by the tree when we had the rendering up. And we could take that to make it look more like a storefront there, even though it's not. And then the next balcony down, I think you'll find that somebody's head is going to be the 6 feet. The elevation is going to be close to 6 feet, more than 6 feet, probably 8 feet, which would make it read like.
Dean, I'm not going to disagree that as you get further down Bridge Street, it becomes much less of a problem. It's really more of an issue to me up at the upper part of the first third of the building.
The first maybe first 2 balconies. So Steve, let's look at that.
Yeah,
we can make that read more like.
Yeah, that's actually easy to adjust. We can slide the units on that side farther downhill, and reallocate some of the lobby administrative area, Ron. So that's not a problem.
Right. So that's the other issue. I mean, that's another don't forget, that's half the special use permits we're talking about is about this residential use on the first floor.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
I
want to understand that. I think that you can, and I don't disagree that you're going to have a real problem renting commercial space, honestly. So I'm not so sure the answer is to say just put more commercial space all along there. unless apartments or this or that. I'm not sure that's the answer. But
I think,
it's more about getting that feel, that residential feel completely away from the street. That's really the issue.
I think, Steve, I have some ideas, and I think you're probably thinking the same thing that.
Yeah. I think the other thing that you both have touched on is it's a little disingenuous to, focus on the term first floor. You know what I'm saying, Ron? And that's, again, partly just a way to designate levels, but it's not really an accurate portrayal of a relationship. And I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. So, that's probably important to acknowledge. If when someone says first floor or not having units on the first floor, what's the premise behind that? And I think we understand what that is. So when you look at the actual design, we can fine tune it to address what we need to address about that first balcony.
And I'd also, oh, I'm sorry. I would also suggest or guess that when that regulation was put into play, it probably contemplated, level. In other words, not a slope situation. In other words, the first floor is at the first floor, so people aren't, hanging out on the sidewalk in a city location, which I agree wouldn't be appropriate. This is a little different situation.
When this was changed, it was sort of specifically said, well, whoever builds apartments there is going to want to be able to have the ones in the back that look at the river down on the first floor. That's sort of how it all got started. I'm not saying that's what you have to do, but that's where that came from. It wasn't about, we need apartments on first floor apartments on Bridge or Durkee. It was, and you're not putting them on Durkee. It was, what about all the apartments in the back that aren't on the front, but they're not allowed? And that's where it came from. I'm not saying that it's not what it says. It's not what it reads. We're not talking about legality. We're talking about the spirit of it a little bit. But I think you understand the question. That's what
I think we can address that in a way that will make sense for everybody, or hopefully we can. So I get it, and it makes sense to me.
Okay, board, any questions, any other stuff you want to see them bring? Go ahead, Ellie.
I'm supposed to be kind of more of an attendee than a participant in this, but is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah.
I guess I want a little more clarification as to why we can't make it smaller. I know it's not quite, but I don't really feel satisfied by the answer, I guess.
Well, let me add something architecturally, Elizabeth, because I think that may be the heart of it, more than the number of units. I think there've been a lot of comments about the height and the scale and whether that's compatible. So we're actually going back, like I said, to some aspects of the original RFP concept, where instead of looking like a 5-story building at the corner of Bridge and Durkee, it's going to be pulled down to 4 stories. And the mezzanine is going to be set back much farther, so that'll be barely perceptible from the street. And I think that's going to do a lot to address these kinds of questions, if that makes sense to you. So that, again, it's going to be really a combination of 4 and I'll say 3-story elements as opposed to 5 and 4-story elements for how it sets up. And there's a way we can do that and still meet Prime's goal of having 115 units and a certain amount of rentable square footage. So I think you'll be pleased with the refinements that we're putting together.
Great.
Again, that's going to reduce the impact of the volume.
And related to the number of units, as Dean had mentioned, they've significantly dropped, and it's an internal financial analysis for Prime as to whether project it can go forward, and 115 units is that number.
Right. Board, any other questions? I've got a couple of things I wanted to bring up, but I don't want to just dominate this. So even though I do, but we have
question.
not. Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's kind of a random thing, and I wanted to ask Emily earlier, but I didn't get to. I've been trying to I don't have a lot of renderings here that show the river walk as it goes past this development and to the farmer's market. Does it actually continue past the farmer's market over to Bridge Street?
Yes.
Or Broad Street, sorry.
So it does continue past the farmer's market. We continue the plantings along in front of the farmer's market building. We hit the tightest point right where you approach the corner of the ICV garage, the northeast corner.
Right.
So the plant bed's really narrow there, but the Riverwalk continues at 10 feet wide. And it does wrap around the corner. And we're proposing connecting it right up to actually the corner of Broad and Durkee there.
Okay. Oh, that was the question I had, is where does it go?
Yeah,
We
so
want to encourage a lot of walking and usage of this path, but if it comes to a dead end, that seems kind of,
we hope to provide sort of an alternate connection for the Saranac River Trail is proposed to terminate there right now, the second phase. So hopefully people could either choose to continue along Durkee Street, or if they want to, kind of meander a little bit, come along the Riverwalk.
And Kelly, there's a great map showing that connectivity as an attachment to my office's April 10th letter that Emily and Dan had up today. So it really does show the connectivity to the other parks and areas.
okay. I thought I saw one earlier when I was flipping through. There was one that showed something. It's the only one I've seen that really showed anything that was built up along that stretch going up to Durkee Street. But I was just curious, and I'm assuming there's going to be lighting and everything on this path.
Yeah, so there are a few existing light poles there now, but we're going to propose a more uniform lighting all the way along. So starting out at Bridge and right on through the Riverwalk.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And I do kind of have the diagram if you want to see that.
All right. Charlie, going forward, we have a couple things. One, we haven't even done anything about the findings. That doesn't come from you. That comes from within, as they say.
Sure. Well, I would like to point out on February 21st, I did submit on my office's letterhead what I call a secret narrative. So that is my interpretation of how we comply with SECRA. And so I hope that is insightful for the board members.
Right. Yeah, and I think that what we need to do as a board is familiarize ourselves with it, understand how we may consider what we're going to consider doing about the findings, whether we're just going to approve them, take exceptions. And there's actually, I think that we're relatively clearer now than we were maybe yesterday, let's say, about how this process is really going to work for us for the findings, but we need to really understand it and make sure what we do to limit or not limit ourselves or our exposure or how we're doing it properly.
Sure.
And if we have things about the findings that we do or don't agree with or take exception to, and we need to define that. So that's one of the things it's got to happen before. We have to do the findings before we're going to do anything with the special use permits. And that's good. So we could work towards getting that done for 2 weeks from now. And we could work on, depending on what information we get from you and what other questions we have, trying to have an idea what type of resolution, because I think we're going to want a written resolution here, as opposed to just, I'm moving as per plans or something, our normal ones. And I think that has to come from us, again, from within, that we need to define that. There's some question today or various days about resolutions of ours, and we believe, I think it's best defined to say that any resolution that we plan on discussing at a meeting should be released if it's available before the meeting, if possible. And there's all this stuff about websites, but basically, I think that resolution is going to be based on all the final information that we have.
Sure.
From you. So we can't really formulate or have in advance of a meeting, probably, a resolution in its final form that we're going to consider. That's, I think, probably a true statement. Whether we can get that done in 2 weeks or not, I think it depends on you guys getting us the information, reacting to the comments. I think we're going to work on it, both with council and separately as a board, and try and come up with that. And I think we're still going to have you on the agenda as a normal thing next. And I don't even know if we have any other stuff to the 18th. Again, I'll just say that it's our common practice to do the little applications first. I mean, that's just what we've always done. And I don't see, we're not going to make somebody wait through 4 hours of prime to ask about their fence. But
Joe,
I
what
don't know
does
if we
the,
have much.
I'm sorry, Ron, Joe, what does the agenda look like for the meeting on the 18th?
I think we only have one other agenda item, and it's a small one.
Okay.
What I,
Thanks, Joe.
what I might suggest, Ron, I actually do represent some municipalities in the state. And what I might suggest as a starting point, because I do realize a resolution and finding statements with this type of contentious matter can somewhat be complicated, is you might direct ZBA council to kind of start that process and formulate something in outline form, what something might look like, so that you guys can start digesting it. We would like to see that process start sooner rather than later because it can be a timely one with a complicated matter. But I think, if he can put pen to paper is a great way to start, no matter what the words say.
Okay, I can tell you this. I've never written a document that has things that start with whereas this and whereas that. So somebody's going to have to help me with it.
Corey's already.
We have.
Corey has already given us, the kind of outline of what we can do and how we can get started, Charlie. So that's something we've already been discussing with him.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
So, I think that this has been a good meeting because the major questions, and which we've never really done, the major questions that the board has have started for the applicant. We've had all kinds of informational meetings, and other than my 3-foot setback comment, I don't think most of this has been heard before. So I think this is very productive. I don't know as there's more work, I think that the next step is for you to give us the new plans and the information as it's, we want to present it about the buildings and the little people as soon as you can, and look at the questions we had tonight, get back to us. Meanwhile, we'll work on that other stuff. The only other question, I guess, is, last time we closed the public hearing and we left the record open for a specific period of time for written comments. And I guess my feeling is that I don't see, we've had new information tonight. I don't necessarily see that we're going to open up a public comment period where people are going to be commenting at the meeting right now. But I'm wondering if it's appropriate. I'm asking the board now, by the way, not the applicant. If it's appropriate for us to open up the written public comment period for a week. Maybe some people are going to write and say, hey, now that you've changed that, that's good, or I don't like this or that. But we've got new information, we've got new conditions that we've set. And I'm wondering if we want to do the same exact process with city info, whatever that address is, and allow written comments that will be incorporated into the record to react to what happened tonight, so that at the next meeting we have those available in case the public comes up with some new comments or questions. Does the board have any thoughts on that?
I think we should do that just because there has been some new information and things might be changing a little bit. I would like to continue allowing public comment.
Right. I tend to agree with a Elizabeth and you, especially since right now we don't know what those changes are. Dean was, or I'm sorry, Steve alluded to them, but until we see them, we can't necessarily say, yeah, this is substantive or not.
Well, we're going to get these changes. Just one sec, Charlie. I'll let you speak. But we're going to get these changes soon. I don't want to, and I know that, Charlie, closing the public hearing affects timelines of various types. And I'm not asking to reopen the public hearing portion right now. I'm asking to open the record back up so that we can, and we're allowed to get information from anybody and ask anybody we want for information, including the applicant, the public, anyone that we feel is germane to or helpful in us making our decision. So even if we're going to get this new information and then post it up on the city website, which we'll do as soon as it's available, I would think that we want to give the public some time after that, but not right up necessarily to the day of the meeting, because I think that's a strain on staff a little bit, and I think people that want to write can write. So I'm wondering as a board, and I'll let you speak before we vote, Charlie. I'm wondering as a board if we want to, it sounds like that there's support. Now, Ellie, you can't vote on this though, but it sounds like there might be support because there's 5 of us voting to do that. But Charlie, go ahead, and then we'll discuss
Sure.
it. Some more.
So, first, the record is open, right? We're creating the record right now. You're never going to stop people from submitting public comments after a deadline is closed. Likewise, I would never say don't consider a comment that comes even after a certain deadline is closed. Related to the information that we're going to be providing, it's in response to a lot of the public comments, and also they're mitigating issues. So whatever Steve and Dean are doing with the design of the building as far as height goes, you'll realize that they're not going to be substantial in nature. We've been hearing comment that the massing and height of the building is a little bit much. We're responding to that by trying to mitigate that by lessening that impact. Much like if you have an area variance for 7 feet, and then you close the public hearing, but the area variance changes to 5 feet, that's not a change because you're reducing the impact. You're reducing what's requested.
That's right.
So it would be my thought that there is no need to reopen the public hearing, but at the same time, people are going to send in letters despite it being open or closed. So I would just suggest written comment if that's the direction the board is going. Because as you can see at the last public hearing, we are seeing the same comments, and I think we had a very productive meeting tonight. And sometimes when we go off, off into the realm of having to restate the public comments, things get less productive. So, just take that with a grain of salt, everyone. What you'll see will be response to comments and mitigation. Nothing. You're not going to see a larger building.
No, I think that, first of all, the idea that you're going to make changes that are going to please everyone and everybody is going to go, oh, perfect. They changed it just like I like it.
I'm sure.
Great. It's not even necessarily. I want to understand how the public reacts to it, and I think that they have they certainly can write a letter. We can't stop anybody from writing a letter. The only question is whether or not we want to make it part of the record, and I don't see that there's any harm to make something part of the record. So I'm gonna look for. I'm gonna tell you that if our meeting is on the 18th, which is a Monday, and we're anticipating getting information by, let's say, Friday, I would say that a week from Friday, to accept written correspondence would be at least appropriate. That way there'd be time to put the information up on the website and for the public to see it and go, hey, you didn't change it as much as I thought, or you changed it, great, whatever. Hopefully the comments will be, again, as you said, about the changes in mitigation, not about old topics, but that we can't control what people say. So I'm going to look for a motion from someone to accept written comments from the public at the same, using the same process up through Friday, the 15th of May.
Ron, this is Corey. Is it your
Yeah, Corey.
intent? Is it your intent to receive additional public comment exclusively related to the additional documentation that's submitted into the record by the applicant?
No.
Okay, so you're just looking to.
It could be about anything. I'm only hoping that's what it would be about, but they may have other things they want to bring up. I don't think it's fair to limit them and to say only about the new documentation. In a sense, everything relates to the new documentation. They could say they didn't go far enough, or they went too far, or they whatever. But no, I mean, I just think that, yeah, in a sense, it's the new information. It's to this whole meeting. It's to the way that the board and the applicant work together tonight. And I'd like to hear what the public has to say about that and how they feel about that process. They may say we didn't do a very good job, but I'd like to know that.
Well, you stated.
Is that a problem?
I don't think it's a problem. You stated accurately how the contents of the record will work, which is you have held a public hearing, you have closed the public hearing. The ZBA has 62 days from the close of the public hearing to render a decision on the special use permits, subject, of course, to that time period being extended upon mutual consent of the applicant. The zoning board can solicit from the applicant or from anyone who thinks will be germane to its deliberative process additional documentation or materials or information that will facilitate you making a decision on the special use permits. The applicant is going to be submitting requested documentation to the board. And I absolutely agree that it's appropriate, if the board sees fit, to allow the public to comment on the additional information that's submitted. What you don't want to do is you don't want to reopen up a public process without any sort of limitation. So as you noted, to a degree, everything, any comments really should be relevant to the issues and matters that were discussed at tonight's meeting. But I think it's important to consider a limitation that, to the extent additional documentation is submitted, it is what you're looking for really is any additional comments that the public may have relevant to the documentation that you've requested and that's been submitted by the applicant.
And or, let me ask you, can it also be about anything that was presented? Yeah, anything that's going to be presented or anything that was presented tonight, in a sense, correct?
You know, to the extent that there was new information that was submitted, I think it's appropriate to allow, you know, if the board sees fit, to allow the public to comment on that. What I'm trying to avoid is simply opening up to comment on any issue, especially considering that the public hearing was held and closed, and we don't want to be seeing as opening it up to relitigate issues that have already been discussed by the board in the past.
How about this then? I'm looking for a motion that will allow public written comment and or for people that aren't able to email using the voicemail system, but using the systems that are in place already for public comment and have been used, to make comments relative to the new information supplied either tonight or afterwards and posted on the city website that we received from the applicant. Does that make sense, Charlie? Corey?
Yeah, and I think you want to put some sort of time limitation. So you don't want people to have to continuously be checking the website to see if there's additional information that they can comment. You know, maybe you include that all such information to be posted on the website by a date certain.
Well, Steve, do you think that you'd have it to us by Friday and we could say it'd be posted Monday?
Turning my microphone on. We'll do the best we can, Ron. The list has grown a bit, but we'll do the best we can. If I said Monday, is that?
Right, well, that would include, because that includes what you're gonna do for the planning board also, right?
Yes. Right.
So, well, how about this? For a period of 1 week after it's posted. Because we don't know when we're posting it. You might get it done Thursday.
Probably not.
You know. No, but
If
we're
we
gonna
get it done sooner, great. But I'm trying to be realistic too. So if I said a week from today, I'm assuming that still works.
Okay.
Okay.
So we would say, assuming it's posted on Monday, the 11th, they would have until, well, I'll tell you what, instead of Friday, Monday at 10 o'clock. No, that's not fair to say. Friday, the 18th. Or, I'm sorry, not the 18th, 15th, right?
15th.
Friday is the 15th.
What is wrong with saying Monday morning, 8 a.m.?
Speaking
'Cause-
personally, it's a bit overwhelming. It's really difficult. I like
Oh.
to read the comments. I like to have the time to digest it and process, and it's really
Right, and
difficult for
staff
me.
gotta get it.
I agree with you, Kelly. I guess the question is though, if it comes in at 5 p.m. on Friday, are we going to get it?
I would
Well,
say.
then that's on the onus of the public. If we're posting to say that they are responsible for having it in, and that's the timeline, I think that's fair to give
Well, I
them
guess-
five
I guess
days.
it's a question for the city. How long does it take from the time we set as a deadline till we would have electronic copies?
Took me about an hour today to get through anything that came in the past week.
Okay, how about 3 o'clock? Shalice, if we said 3 o'clock on Friday,
I could have it to you by 5 o'clock on Friday if you set a 3 o'clock deadline.
right, so it would be open until 3 o'clock on Friday. Is that the 15th? Am I correct about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And then that means we would have it, again, planning everybody's weekend. But anyway, comments. We need to have a motion and a vote on this. We need to decide what that motion is, but to comment on new material, and that's where it would be till, and that is based, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it does matter when the new items get posted. They could comment beforehand on new information that was given tonight, or, whatever. But I think that we aren't going to extend it any further, and then we'll just tell them that, and they'll have the same way. So the motion would be to extend, to open, to allow, I don't want to say open or close or anything, but to allow written public comment and or voicemails in the same system that would close at 3 o'clock on Friday the 15th, pertaining to new information provided. Corey, are you okay with that?
When is the applicant's deadline to have their information submitted?
We don't know, Friday or Monday. As soon as you can.
I think it's important that you set a parameter that.
I would say the 11th. I'm sorry, Corey. I would say the 11th, a week from today, to be realistic.
But what you don't want is you don't want a situation where the public has to continually be checking on the website to see what may or may not have been posted, which is going to trigger their comments. You want to make sure, it appears to me like you're trying to provide for a meaningful opportunity for the public to comment on new information. So I think it's important that you set a specific date within which all of the additional materials that you requested are going to be submitted by. There are a number of issues with the procedure that you're proposing, and I think clarity is the most important thing to make sure that the intent of what you're doing can actually be followed through. So if you are going to, if the public is going to have an opportunity to comment on additional materials, you should know the date upon which those materials, no new materials will be submitted after a certain date, so that people, it's not a constant revolving door of reviewing and responding to comments. Does that make sense, Ron?
Okay, does everybody have comments about that? Go ahead, Steve.
So just for the sake of clarity, what we'll aim to provide then is the comparisons along Bridge and Durkee in terms of height, with a man shown for scale, right? For both comparisons. And then we'll have an updated perspective from the corner showing the two sides along Bridge and Durkee, so you can see it in perspective as well. So you have obviously the before version as well as the new version for comparison.
Is that what you're doing for the planning board, that perspective?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really the best way to understand the impact. I'd like to do a visual simulation, but we simply don't have time, Ron. So the elevation comparisons will have to, sort of address that question of height and scale.
Okay.
Okay.
But I
We're also going to address.
Excuse me, one other thing. Do you want an updated floor plan, or is it sufficient to show the balcony on Bridge Street?
I'd like to see where the balconies are now.
Yeah, we'll revise that.
You want a floor plan then, showing that?
Oh, the elevation, Steve. We'll just fix the elevation.
Yeah, the elevation I can do easily. I just want to make sure it's clear.
Right.
Without the plan, okay? Because we can do that easily, but again, that's all we'll deliver for the 11th, are those items, okay?
And then we'll also look at our sidewalk and see what we can do with that.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could make a suggestion, as far as Corey stated, a deadline for the applicant to submit all new materials. To provide some additional flexibility, I would request that if the board is going to set a deadline, that they set it for sometime on sometime on Wednesday, the 13th. That would be the deadline by which all the new material would need to be posted on the city website. That would give the public 2 days to review that information. And it's not going to be a tremendous amount of new information for them to review. I think 2 days is sufficient for them to analyze that and get us written comments by Friday. Now, I think at this point in the process, the members of the public that are likely to submit additional comments, they will make time in their schedule in order to get those comments in on time.
Yeah, I think that's too restrictive, honestly, to the public. I mean, I understand it, but again, the applicant's coming and asking us for action and approvals, and we've already been told that they're doing something different with the building for the planning board, and we certainly can't do anything until we understand that, and it's not fair if that's going to be a new vision of this building, however slight. And I think it'll reflect better the material differences now too. I mean, it seems like we're going to be able to get this thing Monday and have till Friday. I don't think to say that all of a sudden it becomes 3:30 on Wednesday, and then they have like a day and a half to 2 days and in the midst of their work week to comment. So they can comment on whatever stuff as it becomes available, as long as we can figure out ways to make sure that that word is out. But I think that we need to get that information by a week from today. I don't think they're already working on part of it. Frankly, the elevations are a couple hours of work. The straight on elevations are not like the renderings take 4 hours just for the computer to do them.
Are you volunteering Ron?
No, not right now. Thank you, though. Thanks for the vote of confidence. But anyway, I'm concerned. I want to make sure that the ownership that we have in this process and the limited participation in the process allows for the public is safeguarded a little bit. And I don't think it's reasonable to have stuff on Wednesday and close comments on Friday. We could, if you wanted, wait till 2 weeks from now, have that meeting on the 18th, and then postpone so the public can comment till the meeting in June if you want. But that's not what you want. So everybody wants us to get stuff done. We need to have it. And I think that it's not unreasonable drawing wise, or it's just not unreasonable to do. So the motion that I'd like somebody to propose, because I don't make motions, is assuming any new application information, new information from the applicant is posted by Monday, the 11th. We would close it on Friday at 3 o'clock. If somebody wants to make that motion, or a different one if you want, I don't.
I'll make a motion that we accept written or either electronic written or actually printed written comments or voicemails to the building inspector's office with the following plan. The applicant will have the changes to the city by 5/11, May 11th at 11 a.m. The city will post it on the website by 5 o'clock on that same day, Monday, the 11th, and we will accept comments until Friday, 5:15 at 3 p.m. And the city will commit to having electronic copies out to the members and posted on the website of the comments by the end of business that day.
I second the motion.
Excuse me?
Okay.
If I may,
Oh.
Yes.
I'm going to do this one. What's that? I'm going to do this as a show of hands.
Hang on, Ron. Steve wants to comment.
yeah, if I may, I would request that we have till 5 on Monday. I mean, that makes all the difference for us to give you a better collateral.
I guess it was our intent to get it up on the site on Monday.
Well, let's say, how about 3 p.m. if I think Shalice was saying 2 hours is sufficient? 3 p.m. on Monday?
Yeah.
Will you commit to that, Shalice?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll modify that to the applicant have the information by 3 p.m. on May 11th. And the intent of this is for public comment in regards to any information discussed at this meeting and any new information posted on the website that's given to us by Prime this upcoming week.
Okay. Anyone, who seconded that?
I'll second that.
You want to second the revised one?
Yes. I second the
Okay.
revised motion.
I'm going to do this by a show of hands. All in favor, raise your hand. Aye. Thank you. Okay, that passed 5-0. So that has been carried. We will, otherwise, I think we will wait for your new information. I think it'll be helpful. We're going to see you in 2 weeks. We will work on our resolutions. And we look forward to your new information. Do you have anything else you want to say, applicants?
Just thank you. I think it was very productive and a lot of good comments. So hopefully we can work them all out here.
Hopefully we'll have a lot of
Okay,
good
thank
news on May 15th.
Yep, and I'll second what Dean said. Very productive tonight. Thank you all.
Yeah, and I agree as well. Thank you. I appreciate all the comments. It's been very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any board members? Board member comments?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Do we want to deal with any?
Seconded by-
Do we want to deal with any minutes, or leave that for next meeting?
Now, I don't, we'll do that at the regular meeting, I guess.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
all right. I'll make a
seconded
motion
by-
to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor by a raising of hands? Aye. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. I think it was 3.5 hours, a little over 3.5 hours. Very productive work because we had a special meeting.
Thank you.
Okay?
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks very
Good
much.
night.
Good
Good
night.
night.